Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into 18th century Paris, a city where the streets smell of fresh bread and horse dung, where candlelight paints long shadows on velvet drapes, and where your hair might just be the safest mailbox in France. You're about to discover what it feels like to carry someone's secret, not in your pocket, not in your sleeve, but woven into the architecture of your own head. You probably wouldn't survive this, but let's pretend. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room is still, but not silent. The coals in the fireplace crack softly under their own weight. A floorboard ticks faintly as it cools from the night's damp air. Somewhere beyond the shuttered windows, a milk cart rattles over cobblestones. Your dressing table is cluttered in that particular Parisian way, not disorderly, but full of choices. Ivory combs lie next to a jar of pomade, so smooth it reflects the flicker of the candle beside it. A folded silk ribbon rests on a cushion, its ends curling like a cat's tail. And then a knock. Not the firm, no-nonsense rap of a servant announcing breakfast. Not the brisk triple tap of your hairdresser either. This is softer. One knuckle twice. The sound is as hesitant as a secret about to be told. The door opens just enough for a friend to slip through. Her cheeks are flushed from the cold, and her eyes are bright with the sort of excitement that makes her mouth twitch before she speaks. She doesn't speak at all. Instead, she produces a small, folded paper, edges slightly crumpled, and places it on the edge of your mirror table. There's a faint smell to it. Violets, maybe, but with something sharper underneath. Ink. Ink has a smell you only notice when it's fresh, or when you're looking for it. She presses your hand once and leaves without a word. The door closes, the latch clicking with a softness that feels deliberate. You pick up the paper. The wax seal is broken, perhaps by her, perhaps by someone else before it ever reached her hand. The fold is neat, but the edges are worn. It has traveled. This letter. You resist the urge to open it. Not here. Not now. Not when the morning light is about to slip through the shutters and your hairdresser could arrive any moment. You place it into a small silk pouch and set it beside the jar of pomade. The two look like unlikely companions, one for beauty, one for treachery, but they will soon share the same hiding place. Outside, Paris stirs. The bell of a distant church marks the hour. A fishwife shouts her wares in a voice that could probably carry across the Seine without assistance. Somewhere closer, a dog barks twice and then falls silent. You breathe in, and the air tastes of yesterday's ashes and this morning's bread. When the hairdresser arrives, he will not ask what you're hiding. That's not his business. His business is the creation of height and illusion, of curls that loop like the scrollwork on a wrought iron balcony, of powder that settles in a fine frost over everything it touches. You glance at the mirror and try to picture the day ahead. The salon visit where your coiffure will be admired. The quiet glance from the person who will later receive what you're carrying. The moment when this letter so thin, so unremarkable will pass from you to them without a word. A fact worth keeping in mind. By the 1772nd, hair in Paris wasn't just a style, it was a social statement. Some wore their hair high to declare their status. Others did it simply because it made the face seem longer, the neck more elegant. But for those with reason to hide something, a lover's note, a political message, a list of names that extra height offered, opportunity. Not every story of women hiding letters in their hair is true. Scholars disagree about how common it was. Some dismiss it as satire born from men mocking elaborate fashion. Yet, like most satire, it grows from a seed of possibility. And here you are, watering that seed with bergamot-scented pomade. You run your fingers through your hair, cool to the touch, faintly stiff from yesterday's powder. The strands catch on the rough skin of your fingertips. They smell faintly of starch, wood smoke, and lavender water. Soon they will be coaxed into loops and rolls, some of which will exist purely for beauty, and one of which will serve a far more practical purpose. On the dressing table, your tools wait. A swan's down puff for powder, the comb with its teeth worn smooth, the long silver pins that hold more than just hair in place. Each one has been handled so often that it knows its role without hesitation. You can already imagine the hairdresser's hands quick, deft, a little theatrical. The way he will part your hair in sections, lifting each as though presenting a delicate item at auction. The way he will nod to himself when the pouch containing the letter disappears under the second loop from the crown. The way he will say nothing about it, just as he said nothing the last time. The knock comes again, brisk, certain. This time it is him. You call for him to enter. He steps in, carrying a lacquered case that releases a faint cloud of rice powder when he sets it down. He says something about the weather, how the damp will be kind to the curls today, and begins unpacking. Comb, pomade, ribbon, powder, the tools of his trade, laid out in an order only he understands. He does not look at the silk pouch, but his hands, when they reach for your hair, are careful. He works the pomade into the strands, the bergamot scent blooming in the air between you. His fingers divide and lift, loop and pin. You feel the gentle weight of the letter settle into its place, cradled between ribbons and curls. Outside, the city grows louder. The shouts of sellers, the creak of wagon wheels, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. Inside, there is only the whisper of the comb, the sigh of the powder puff, and the faint creak of your chair when you shift. There is humor in this, though you don't say it aloud. The men who mock the height of women's hair imagine birds nesting in it, or pies cooling there, or your favorite, a tiny theater complete with puppets. Let them laugh. It keeps them from guessing that sometimes what's hidden is far smaller, far more dangerous, and far easier to miss. The hairdresser leans back to admire his work. Perfect, he murmurs. You glance in the mirror. It is perfect, every curl intentional, every ribbon deliberate. The letter is invisible. He dusts your shoulders with a final pat of powder and steps away. You thank him, and he leaves with the quiet efficiency of someone who understands that beauty, like secrets, is best tended without fuss. You are ready for the day. The letter rests securely in its alcove of hair. The city waits beyond your door, and Paris hums with the sound of 10,000 conversations, some spoken, some written, some carried above the ear of a woman who appears to be thinking only about fashion. The truth is, fashion has always been about more than appearances. And today, it's about delivery. The door has barely closed behind your hairdresser before you notice the way the air has changed. The faintest whiff of rice powder lingers, mingling with the bergamot of the pomade and the smoke from the morning's first fire. It's a scent that would mean nothing to someone passing in the street. To you, it's the smell of readiness. You're still seated before the mirror, the silk pouch containing the letter cradled in your palm like a secret you can feel but not yet reveal. Outside, the clatter of hooves and wagon wheels begins to pick up somewhere far away. A bell tolls, not hurried, not slow, just enough to mark the hour without making the day feel urgent. Your hairdresser returns to his tools with the same concentration a calligrapher might give to the first stroke of a pen. The comb, long and narrow, gleams in the light from the window. He runs it through your hair with gentle precision, pausing now and then to assess the weight, the fall, the way each section responds. High today, he murmurs, not as a question, but as an inevitability. In the 1772nd, high hair is more than a fashion. It's a statement, a language all its own. Its grammar is written in loops and twists, its vocabulary in ribbons and pins. You nod, the movement small, measured. Your letter shifts slightly against your temple, and you imagine it sighing into its new place, the first step in its journey from you to its intended eyes. The pomade comes first. He scoops it with a small pewter spoon, the kind worn thin from years of use, and warms it between his hands until it softens to a buttery consistency. The smell blooms again, citrus, beeswax, a whisper of tallow underneath. It's the tallow that will hold your hair, but the bergamot that will keep you from smelling like the kitchen. He smooths it through your hair in sections, each motion slow, deliberate, almost hypnotic. The strands darken and shine under the treatment, becoming pliable, willing to obey. Next, the first division hair drawn up from the crown and twisted into a narrow rope before being coiled into a small, tight loop. This loop will form the anchor for the rest of the style, the unseen base upon which the entire structure rests. The silk pouch comes into play now. He holds it for a moment in his palm, weighing it as if gauging its size against the loops to come. Without a word, he slips it beneath the second coil from the crown, tucking it into a hollow created by the twist. The pins that follow are long, slender, and silver, sliding into place with a sound so faint you can feel it more than hear it, like the click of a lock turning. From here, the architecture begins in earnest. Loops of hair are arranged forward, then back, some rising higher than others to create the illusion of effortless height. Between them, ribbons are woven in pale blue today, the color of the Seine in winter sunlight. The language of powder and pins is not taught in any school, but it is understood by every woman who sits in a Parisian boudoir in this century. A narrow braid curling over the ear might mean nothing, or it might signal to an ally in the same room that a message is ready to be exchanged. A cluster of 3 ribbon rosettes could be pure decoration, or the mark of belonging to a certain salon. Your hairdresser, like all men in his profession, knows these symbols well. He uses them now with a subtlety that would impress even the most practiced of courtiers. The powdering comes next. He dips the swan's down puff into the rice powder, tapping it gently to remove the excess, before patting it over your hair in slow, even motions. A faint cloud rises each time, catching in the light and settling on your lashes, your shoulders, the edge of your fichu. Powdering does more than lighten the hair. It softens every line, turning the whole head into a kind of misted canvas. It also masks the faintest scent of ink from the letter, though that may be more superstition than science. It's a comfort nonetheless. He works silently, except for the occasional clearing of his throat or the faint hum of a tune without words. Outside, the city noise ebbs and flows, calls from vendors, the snap of a whip, the distant murmur of voices speaking in that clipped, quick rhythm unique to Paris. A fact tucked into your thoughts the way the letter is tucked into your hair. While towering coiffures became exaggerated in satirical prints, most were practical for movement and stability. Height was achieved through careful teasing, padding, and strategic loops, not the absurd scaffolding imagined by foreign caricaturists. And yet, those caricatures still hold a sliver of truth, because anything that can be built can be used, and anything that can be used for something else. This is why your letter rests so easily now. It is not perched precariously like an ornament. It is integrated, part of the design, as safe as any secret can be in public. 3 more pins slide home, their heads disappearing into the powdery landscape. A final ribbon is tied, its tails curling down toward your shoulder. He steps back, tilts his head, and considers. "It will hold," he says simply. You glance at your reflection. The style is tall but not ostentatious, elegant without drawing undue attention. The letter is invisible, as it must be. You lean forward slightly, testing the stability. The curls hold. The pouch holds. Your composure holds. The language of powder and pins has spoken. Your message is in place, and the day can begin. The shutters open with a slow, deliberate creak, letting in a narrow slice of pale morning light. It stretches across the dressing table, glinting off the polished ivory of your combs, catching in the faint white haze of powder that still hangs in the air. You can smell the damp from the street below, rainwater on stone, tinged with the yeasty perfume of bread baking somewhere nearby. Paris at first light is a city still shaking off its dreams. It is quieter than it will be in an hour, but never silent. The calls of the earliest street sellers drift upward, the fishwife announcing her catch, the knife grinder ringing his bell in sharp, musical intervals, the baker's boy shouting about warm loaves straight from the oven. The air coming through the shutters is cool and carries the weight of the night's fog. You let it brush against your face, careful not to disturb the coiffure that now hides more than powder and ribbon. The letter, secure in its nest of curls, does not stir. Your gown for the day hangs on a carved screen by the window, pale dove-gray silk with a subtle vine motif embroidered along the hem. It's a choice calculated to appear respectable, even modest, yet fashionable enough to keep you from being mistaken for anything less than a woman of influence. Too much decoration, and you risk drawing the wrong kind of curiosity. Too plain, and you risk blending into the background impossible to spot by the one person who needs to find you. The stays you wear keep your back straight as you move to the screen. You run your fingers along the smooth fabric of the skirt, feeling the slight give of the embroidered vines under your fingertips. They are raised just enough to catch the light, much like the subtle glint of the letter's folded edge, though no one will see it. You slip into the gown with practiced movements, allowing your maid to fasten the hooks along the bodice and adjust the fichu at your neckline. She moves quietly, her fingers precise, avoiding the elaborate architecture above your head. Only once does she pause, glancing briefly at your hair with a knowing flicker in her eyes. She says nothing, but the corner of her mouth curves in the faintest suggestion of a smile. Outside, a carriage passes, its wheels sending a fan of muddy droplets toward the gutter. The driver calls something to the horses in a voice low enough to be almost swallowed by the city's hum. The sound of hooves on wet cobblestones is steady, rhythmic, a soft percussion to the unfolding day. In this hour, before the salons open their doors and the cafes fill with talk, Paris feels almost private. The streets belong to tradesmen and servants, to milkmaids balancing their yokes, to porters carrying crates of oranges from the docks. You watch them through the narrow gap in the shutters, noting the way they weave around one another without colliding, a choreography born from necessity. A milkmaid in a wool cloak glances upward briefly, as if sensing your gaze. You step back instinctively, the letter in your hair giving you the sudden feeling of being seen in a way that has nothing to do with your face or your dress. But she keeps walking, humming a tune that you can't quite place. The mirror offers its final verdict. Every curl is in place, every ribbon tied just so. The style is high enough to be fashionable, balanced enough to survive the day's movements, and most importantly, discreet enough to keep its secret until the moment of delivery. You pull on your gloves, the leather snug against your fingers, and pick up your reticule. A vinaigrette rests inside, along with a handkerchief embroidered in blue silk. If conversation grows too warm or too crowded later, the vinaigrette will be your rescue. The bells of Saint-Sulpice begin to chime, their deep notes rolling across the rooftops and into your room. They are not hurried bells. They do not demand. They simply mark the moment, letting you know that the city is fully awake. You draw your cloak around your shoulders, careful not to disturb the coiffure. The hood lies flat against your back. Wearing it up would crush the loops and reveal more than you intend. When you open the door, the street greets you with a wash of cool air and the mingled scents of earth, yeast, and horse. The cobblestones are slick underfoot, each step placed with care. Paris breathes around you, the murmur of voices at doorways, the scrape of a broom on stone, the faint laughter of two apprentices sharing a joke in the next street. You walk at a measured pace, the way one does when every step has its own quiet purpose. To any observer, you are simply a woman on her way to begin her day. To you, each stride is a part of the letter's journey. The Seine lies ahead, its surface still holding a veil of mist from the night. Somewhere beyond it waits the recipient of what you carry, though neither of you would ever admit it aloud. Not here, not now. Your shoes click softly against the stones, matching the slow rhythm of your breathing. The letter remains hidden, silent, and safe. Paris is awake, and so are you. The salon is already warm when you arrive, though the fire in the marble hearth is more symbolic than functional. It burns in a controlled, deliberate way, a steady orange glow that seems to exist for the sake of appearances, like the way you keep your fan half open when you aren't using it. The air smells of perfume layered over perfume, rose water, orange blossom, lavender sachets tucked into sleeves. There's also the sharper, more honest scent of melting beeswax from the chandeliers above, mingled with the faint sweetness of wine poured too early in the day. You step into the circle of chairs without rushing. Conversations ripple around you, each one soft enough to sound polite but sharp enough to carry meaning. No one here wastes words. In this room, every sentence is a coin, every pause a negotiation. A woman in a pale blue gown leans toward you as you take your seat. Her fan, painted with a scene of shepherds that has never known a real sheep, flicks open in a quick, practiced motion. The feathers at its edge brush against your sleeve, almost as if they are testing for a reaction. They say the Duchess has taken to her bed again, she murmurs, eyes not quite meeting yours. You nod as though you've been expecting the news. In truth, this is the first you've heard of it, but that doesn't matter. The important thing is to seem as though nothing surprises you, not illness, not scandal, not the possibility that someone in this very room has been watching your every movement since you arrived. The letter in your hair presses faintly against your temple. It's not heavy, but its presence is constant, like the weight of an earring you've worn too long. You can almost hear it in your mind, the way one might hear the imagined ticking of a clock in a silent room. You shift your head slightly to the left, both to ease the sensation and to signal subtly to the man across the room in the wine-colored coat. His gaze flicks upward, just briefly, before returning to the woman he's speaking to. The glance is nothing, unless you know to look for it. Another voice joins the conversation, a man with a soft laugh and a habit of speaking as though he's telling a joke even when he isn't. They say the Comédie Française will debut a new play next month, he says, eyes glinting. But the playwright has been seen taking his breakfast with a certain lady, who also happens to have connections in Versailles. The woman beside you raises an eyebrow, the barest tilt of surprise. Connections or contracts? She asks. And the ripple of laughter that follows is small but pointed. You let the exchange pass over you like a wave. Your role here is not to swim against the current, but to drift just enough to remain unnoticed until the exact moment you must be seen. The hostess glides past, trailing a faint cloud of violet perfume. Her gown rustles like paper, her smile both generous and guarded. She pauses beside you, placing a hand on your arm in greeting. Your hair is exquisite today, she says, her tone warm but her eyes assessing. Compliments in this room are often double-edged. They can flatter while also probing for information. You smile and return a slow, measured expression that offers no foothold for further inquiry. A servant moves silently around the edge of the room, refilling glasses. The faint clink of crystal punctuates the soft murmur of voices. Somewhere near the hearth, a pair of men exchange words too quiet to catch, but their glances toward the door tell you all you need to know. Someone expected has not yet arrived. The game here is never about the loudest voice. It's about the one who listens, who gathers, who notices. And today, that is you. You unfold your fan with a delicate snap, letting its movement draw the eye for just a moment before settling it in your lap. Across the room, the man in the wine-colored coat lifts his own fan, a masculine version in black lacquer, and taps it twice against his knee. It is nothing to anyone else. To you, it is the signal you've been waiting for. The rest of the room carries on, laughter here, a gasp there, the rustle of skirts, the faint scrape of a chair being moved. You join in where expected, offering a polite remark about the weather, a feigned chuckle at a mildly scandalous anecdote. All the while, the letter remains safe, invisible, and poised for its next stage of travel. In Paris, gossip may be currency, but the true wealth lies in knowing when to spend it and when to keep it hidden. You rise when the conversation turns toward an upcoming masquerade, excusing yourself with the grace of someone whose absence will not be questioned. As you move toward the door, the sound of the room fades behind you, replaced by the quieter hum of the corridor. The letter in your hair feels almost lighter now, as though it understands that the moment is drawing closer. Your back has learned the language of stays so well that you no longer think about them until you sit. Then, as you lower yourself into a chair, they make themselves known, a firm but polite reminder that posture is not negotiable. The stays, or corset, as someone in a century far from now might call it, are not a single thing so much as a conversation between many. The linen that forms the body, the channels stitched by steady hands, the slender whalebone that runs inside those channels like hidden sentences. And then there is the busk, a smooth, flat piece of wood that slides into its own pocket down the front, giving you a quiet axis to turn around all day. This morning, the busk is pear wood, worn so smooth from years of wear that your fingertips find no splinter, no seam. At its base, hidden from anyone's sight, is a tiny carved heart. You didn't put it there, it was there when the busk came to you, but you like to imagine some previous owner's moment of idle affection. Maybe for the busk, maybe for the person who made it. Your maid laced you earlier with the slow precision of someone tuning a harp. A gentle pull here, a pause, another pull. She counts not in numbers, but in breaths yours. You've heard the stories about women fainting from tight lacing, but the truth is more complicated. Some faint from heat, some from too much perfume. some because a crowded salon offers too little air. Today, your lacing is firm but forgiving, enough to make you feel supported without pinching. The leather in your hair benefits from this. A steady spine and level shoulders mean less risk of jostling the loops and curls that shelter it. Your posture becomes part of the leather's defense, another piece of architecture in the chain. You rise from the salon chair with care, feeling the gentle creak of whalebone, a sound so soft you feel it more than hear it, like paper flexing. The sound reassures you. It means the stays are doing their work, holding you in alignment, smoothing the line between bodice and skirt. Your skirt today rests over modest pocket hoops, giving it a shape that's both graceful and practical. Those hidden spaces beneath the drape of silk are not empty. One side holds a folded handkerchief, the other a vinaigrette, a tiny silver case lined with a vinegar-soaked sponge. You will open it discreetly if the air grows heavy with perfume or gossip. A fact stored quietly alongside your own secrets. Stays of this century are as much about support as they are about shape. Satirical prints may exaggerate, showing waist cinched to improbable thinness. But many women wear theirs for the stability they offer during long days. Tailors cut gowns with the assumption that stays will be worn beneath, the two garments fitting together like matched puzzle pieces. Without stays, the gown would sag. Without the gown, the stays would seem incomplete. Scholars still debate exactly how tight they were laced on average, some citing medical complaints, others pointing to portraits where the waist is clearly proportionate. You've decided the truth lives somewhere between, as it often does. The maid who laced you this morning is one of the few who knows that your hair holds more than decoration today. When she brushed the powder from your shoulders, her fingertips lingered for just a moment near your temple, as if confirming that everything was still in place. You caught her eye in the mirror, and the corner of her mouth lifted, not enough to be called a smile, but enough to be understood. As you walk toward the door of the salon, the stays guide your movement. The busk keeps you steady through each step, and the hoops keep your skirt from tangling around your legs. Each part of your clothing is a collaborator in the performance one that appears effortless, but in truth is a quiet, constant negotiation between body and garment. The letter is still silent, invisible. You wonder if it feels the same way you do in this moment, contained, prepared, waiting. You step out into the street. The air is damp, carrying the mingled scents of horse, earth, and the faint sweetness of a nearby bakery. The cobblestones glisten underfoot, and your shoes make a soft tapping sound that blends into the rhythm of the morning traffic. You pause briefly, adjusting the fall of your cloak so it rests smoothly over the skirt. From the outside, it's a gesture of neatness. From the inside, it's a way to feel the reassuring firmness of the stays against your body and the stability they give to the hidden message in your hair. In Paris, elegance is never just about beauty. It's about control of posture, of expression, of the things you choose to carry and the way you choose to carry them. The street turns toward the river, and you follow, each step measured. The stays, the busk, the hoops, they all keep their promises. And so does the letter. The shop is small enough that when you open the door, every scent inside greets you at once. Orange blossom, rosewater, violet, bergamot, and beneath it all, something sharper, the resinous bite of distilled spirits used to carry those floral notes into the air. It's like stepping into a bouquet that has decided to learn geometry. Everything arranged, layered, and balanced with exact precision. Your hairdresser had already dusted you this morning with powder that carries its own faint sweetness, but here, you're surrounded by perfume strong enough to outshine it. That is the point. If there is even the faintest trace of ink still clinging to the folded paper above your temple, it will be lost in this air. The perfumer greets you with a bow, his coat brushed so neatly that it reflects a little of the light from the wall sconces. He speaks in a voice as soft as the silks that line the shelves, asking whether you've come for a particular fragrance or simply to browse. You smile, slow and composed, and say you've come to replenish your stock of orange blossom water. He nods knowingly and gestures to a display where glass bottles, each with a curved neck and wax seal, stand like soldiers waiting for orders. As he wraps one bottle in crisp paper, He launches into a gentle lecture about the origin of this particular batch distilled in Grasse, carried to Paris by mule, and decanted only this week. His voice is pleasant, measured, the perfect background for your own quiet inventory of the room. 3 other customers are here. A young woman testing rose pomade on the back of her hand, an older man sniffing a vial of lavender with closed eyes, and a gentleman in a dove-gray coat whose gaze flickers toward you more often than toward the cologne bottles in front of him. He doesn't approach. Not yet. You take the opportunity to test a sample of violet water, dabbing it behind your ear, not the ear with the letter tucked above it, but the other. The cool wetness sinks into your skin, releasing a fragrance so soft it almost disappears as you breathe it in. A fact you know, because you've lived among people who trade in both beauty and secrets. Perfume is not merely decoration. In the 18th century, it can serve to mask the smells of the city, the animal musk of unpaved streets, the sweat of crowded rooms, but it can also hide the faint, telltale sense of things one might prefer remain unnoticed. Ink, sealing wax, even the faint dust of certain medicinal powders, all can be softened or entirely obscured by a careful layer of fragrance. Some say that heavy perfume is a confession in itself, as if the wearer must be hiding something unpleasant. But in your case, it's the opposite. You wear scent to ensure that the most important thing about you today remains undiscovered. The perfumer offers you a strip of paper. It's tip-dipped in a new blend he calls Feuille d'Aurore, dawn leaf. You bring it to your nose, and the fragrance unfurls slowly, green at first, then warm, with a note like baked pears. It's lovely, but you shake your head politely. The scent you carry must be familiar enough not to invite questions. You return to the orange blossom, as you always do. A scent with history, with respectability, with the ability to sit close to the skin and not shout its presence. The gentleman in the dove-gray coat moves closer now, examining the bottles on the same table you stand beside. He does not look at you, not directly, but his next words are pitched just enough for you to hear. They say the opera has taken on a new patron, he murmurs, as if speaking to himself. A man who has interests beyond the stage. It is not the kind of remark one makes idly. You let the words pass without acknowledgement, but the faintest tilt of your head lets him know you've heard. The perfumer wraps your purchase in brown paper, tying it with a length of string before placing it into your reticule. As you thank him and turn to leave, you pass close enough to the man in the dove-gray coat that your skirts brush his sleeve. There is no visible exchange, no pause in either of your steps, but you feel the shift in your coiffure as a small folded scrap slides into place next to the letter you already carry. Outside, the air feels cooler after the warmth and fragrance of the shop. The scent of orange blossom clings to you now, mingled with powder and the faint starch of your fichu. Whatever messages you carry are invisible, their physical presence hidden within curls, ribbons, and the architecture of your hair. But their existence is masked even further by the perfume's soft embrace. The street noise swells again. Carriage wheels over cobblestones, the calls of vendors, the creak of wooden shutters being thrown open for the day. None of it touches you directly. You walk as if each step were preordained, each turn already decided, the perfume drifting in your wake like a veil that says nothing at all. If anyone notices you, they will remember the scent first, then the gown, then perhaps the way your hair caught the morning light. They will not remember that you walked out of the perfumer's shop carrying more words than you walked in with. That is the success of perfume. It can make the truth smell like nothing at all. The driver tips his hat as he opens the carriage door for you. The gesture just polite enough to make you wonder whether he's truly looking at you or at the way your skirts are lifted to clear the step. Either way, you give him no more than a faint nod before settling into the upholstered seat. The cushions are firm, covered in green damask that smells faintly of dust and camphor. You let your gloved fingers rest lightly on the edge of the seat, while the driver closes the door with a solid thunk. Outside, the sounds of the street are muted but not erased. The shouts of vendors, the creak of wagon wheels, the occasional whinny of a horse all find their way in through the carriage walls. But as the wheels begin to turn, another sound joins them, the steady, rhythmic thud of hooves, and the faint rattle of the coach's iron fittings. You shift slightly, testing the balance of your coiffure. The letter above your temple remains exactly where it should, cradled in the hollow between curls and pinned loops. Still, the movement of a carriage is never predictable. A sudden jolt could send a curl out of place, and while most would think nothing of it, you have no desire to risk discovery. You glance out the small window, watching Paris slide past in a sequence of images. A baker's boy, carrying a tray of rolls still steaming from the oven. A flower seller, arranging buckets of tulips in the pale sunlight. A chimney sweep, his face smudged with soot, tipping his cap to a pair of laughing girls. Across from you, the only other passenger, a man in a brown coat with a frayed cuff, keeps his gaze fixed on the floor. His hat rests in his lap, and his hands twist the brim as though it might give him answers. He doesn't look at you directly, but every so often his eyes flick upward, perhaps catching the gleam of your ribbons. In another setting, you might worry about his attention. Here, you simply adjust your fan in your lap, a signal to yourself as much as to anyone else. Stillness is safety. The carriage jolts as it rounds a corner, and you place a hand lightly against your hair to steady it. To any observer, it is a gesture of vanity. To you, it is a safeguard. The letter doesn't shift. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. A fact drifts into your mind, one of those details you've picked up in passing and tucked away like a ribbon in a drawer. 18th century Paris has no shortage of eyes in the street. Coachmen gossip with footmen, flower sellers with laundresses, even beggars with their own network of information. Many a scandal has made its way from carriage to salon without ever touching paper. But paper is what you carry, and so paper must remain unseen. The man across from you finally speaks, his voice low and rough. "Fine morning," he says, not quite meeting your gaze. "Yes," you reply, matching his tone. That is the end of it. Through the window, you catch sight of a pair of uniformed guards at the corner where the Rue Saint-Honoré meets the wider boulevard. They're speaking to a woman whose hands are full of market parcels, her face half hidden by the brim of her hat. The guards look bored rather than suspicious, but still, you glance away before they can look in your direction. The carriage slows, the driver's voice muffled as he calls out to someone unseen. A moment later, you hear the jingle of coins and the faint scrape of wheels starting again. Perhaps he paid a toll. Perhaps he simply purchased information in the form of a favor. In this city, both transactions sound the same. Another jolt as the wheels hit an uneven patch of stones, and this time the man across from you loses his grip on his hat. It lands at your feet. You lean forward to pick it up, careful to keep your movements smooth. He thanks you with a nod, his eyes flicking to your hair for just a fraction too long. You return the hat without a word. When the carriage finally slows near your destination, you reach for your reticule, checking the contents by touch. The vinaigrette, the handkerchief, the neatly wrapped bottle of orange blossom water. Everything is as it should be. You smooth your skirts, let your fingers brush briefly against the side of your head where the letter rests, and prepare to step out. The driver opens the door, and the daylight spills in, bright enough to make you squint. You descend to the street, feeling the subtle shift of your skirts settling back into place. Behind you, the carriage rolls away, its wheels already swallowed by the noise of the city. In Paris, there is always someone watching. Sometimes they're obvious guards at a corner, a gossip at a window. Sometimes they're hidden, as you are now, carrying something worth seeing but never showing. You take one step forward, then another, and let the crowd fold around you. You've heard your hairdresser call it sculpture, but you know better, it's architecture. A building just happens to begin at your scalp, built with strands instead of stone, ribbons instead of timber, pins instead of nails. This morning's work is holding perfectly. Not a curl droops, not a ribbon sags. The loops are placed in such a way that they create small alcoves and shadowed hollows, places no one thinks to look, because no one imagines they could hold anything. It's artistry, but it's also engineering. The street around you is busy, and you use its noise as a kind of cover. The hammering of a carpenter fixing a door across the lane, the clipped calls of a vegetable seller announcing new peas from the market gardens, the low rumble of a cart crossing a bridge. You walk with the unhurried pace of someone who belongs exactly where she is. A fact you once overheard at a milliner's shop drifts back to you now. The tallest coiffures at court can reach nearly 3 feet from base to tip, a feat made possible by pads of wool, wired supports, and in some cases, carved wooden frames hidden under the hair. Satirical prints show absurdities, birds' nests, miniature windmills, but even in exaggeration, the truth lingers. Large structures invite ornament. Ornament invites concealment. Your own style today is moderate by comparison, a balance between fashion and practicality. Its height is just enough to draw the eye upward without making you a hazard to doorways. The letter rests in a space created by the second coil from the crown, stabilized by two pins angled to hold it flat against the curve of your head. You pass a group of young apprentices carrying planks of wood. One of them glances your way, grinning at his companions before returning to his load. You know the look well, amusement at the elaborate hairstyles of women, an amusement born from not understanding their function beyond decoration. Let him laugh. Laughter is safer than suspicion. In quieter streets, your mind drifts back to the process itself, the layering, the lifting, the moment when the hairdresser's fingers pause in midair to judge the shape before adding the next loop, the little conversation he had with himself in half-muttered words. Here, yes, this will sit here, as though the hair could hear and obey. And in a way, it does. Hair, when treated with pomade and powder, holds memory. Loops remember their curves. Twists remember their tension. Today, those memories are arranged to serve a purpose beyond beauty. Protection. You pause at the corner to allow a carriage to pass. Its lacquered panels reflect a brief, warped image of you, a tall silhouette topped with powdered loops and ribbons. For a moment, you imagine the style as an actual building, the ribbons as window shutters, the curls as curved balconies, the powdered crown as a pale stone facade. And somewhere inside, in a private chamber, the letter waits. This thought amuses you enough to bring a hint of a smile to your lips, though you let it fade before you step forward again. In another part of the city, there is an ongoing debate about whether such coiffures are a sign of vanity or intelligence. Those who call them vain forget that to build something high and stable requires knowledge of balance, of proportion, of what will hold and what will fall. Those who admire them too openly often underestimate their subtlety, and almost no one speaks of the possibility that a coiffure can be more than a fashion statement. You keep walking. The rhythm of your steps matches the sway of the curls above. Each turn of your head sends a faint perfume of orange blossom into the air. Ahead, the street narrows, and the taller buildings cast a cool shadow over the stones. Here, the sounds are softer. The creak of a sign swinging overhead, the faint trickle of water from an unseen spout. You slow your pace, letting your eyes adjust. The shade is welcome. Less glare means less chance of anyone noticing the minute lines of the hairpins that secure your secret. You think of your hairdresser again, of the pride in his voice when he said, "It will hold." It's not simply vanity. It's a craftsman's confidence in his work. Like any builder, he knows the strength of his materials, the pressure points, the places where a structure can be reinforced without drawing attention. You are, for today, walking proof of his skill. A moving, breathing building carrying its own hidden room. The street opens into a wider market square, and the sound hits you like warm air from a bakery oven, sudden, enveloping, full of competing scents and voices. Paris in the morning has its own orchestra, and the cellars are its chorus. A fishwife near the fountain shouts her prices in a voice that could split stone. She lifts a glistening carp high for all to see, the water dripping from its scales catching the light like tiny coins. Beside her, a boy no older than 10 calls out the freshness of his oysters, his words tumbling over each other as he tries to keep pace with his own enthusiasm. A few stalls down, the vegetable seller sings his inventory as though it were a ballad, petit pois, haricots, verts, carottes nouvelles, each word stretched for rhythm. The notes mingle with the sharper cries of the knife grinder, who rings a small brass bell in between boasts of how sharp he can make a blade. Somewhere to your left, the soft, rhythmic call of the bread seller punctuates the higher voices, a warm, yeasty bass line beneath the rest. The air is thick with the smell of fish, fresh greens, baking bread, and the metallic tang of knives being honed. It's enough to make you feel as though every breath is a meal. You move through the square at an even pace, allowing the noise to cover your own steps. The bustle here is the perfect kind of cover in such a crowd. No one notices the tilt of your head as you check that the letter is still in place. the faint press of pins against your scalp. A fact you recall from an old servant's tale. Markets have always been safe places for passing messages. Too many eyes, too many voices, too many smells for anyone to fix on just one person. A slip of paper from hand to hand can vanish here as easily as a silver coin. A flower seller intercepts you, her apron dusted with pollen. She offers a posy of violets, the scent sharp enough to cut through the smell of fish and bread. You accept, slipping a coin into her palm, and as she hands you the flowers, her fingers brush yours just long enough to feel intentional. No paper changes hands, not now, but the exchange is noted. You tuck the violets into the fold of your fichu, their petals brushing your skin. The letter above your temple remains still, but somehow its presence feels louder in this moment, as if it knows the market is one of the possible stages for its delivery. Children dart between the stalls, weaving around baskets and barrels with the agility of cats. One of them bumps into your skirts, murmurs a quick apology, and vanishes again before you can respond. It's nothing unusual, but your hand instinctively rises to touch your hair, reassuring yourself that the architecture above remains untouched. It does. The chorus continues. A seller of roasted chestnuts cracking shells against the rim of his cart, a woman hawking ribbons in every color of the rainbow, a man offering penny fortune-tellings beneath a tattered awning. His voice rises and falls like a wave, pulling customers in and letting them drift away again. You linger briefly by a stall selling jars of honey so pale they glow in the morning light. The vendor explains that his bees feed on wildflowers from the outskirts of the city, their hives kept far from the smoke of the streets. You nod politely, but your mind is elsewhere, calculating the safest path out of the square, one that will take you closer to your destination without attracting notice. When you finally step away from the honey stall, you find the chorus still in full voice, but already shifting. The fishwife's calls are shorter now, the bread, seller's basket a little lighter. The market has its own rhythm, and you've learned to move with it, to be part of the crowd without being consumed by it. As you leave the square, the noise fades into a distant hum, like a song you can still hear even after it has ended. The scent of violets rises from your fichu, and the letter remains a silent passenger in its hidden room above your temple. In Paris, the street sellers sing for their supper, but they also sing for those who know how to listen. The salon you enter now is not like the one earlier in the day. This one is smaller, more intimate, a room designed for the kind of conversation that keeps its voice low and its meaning layered. The air is warm, scented faintly of beeswax polish, and the soft smoke curling from a single stick of incense in the corner. The room's centerpiece is not the hearth, but the people. Women in silk gowns the color of sugared almonds, men in coats so finely cut they might as well be stitched directly onto their bones. Everyone here holds a fan, lace-edged, painted, feathered, and every fan is in motion. To the uninitiated, it might look like idle fidgeting, but to you, it's a language, as structured as the loops and pins in your hair. A quick snap open can signal interest. A slow sweep across the cheek can mean disagreement. Tap the fan against the lips, and you are asking for silence. Let it hang loosely from your wrist, and you are declaring yourself available for conversation. This language is not officially taught, of course. It's learned in the slow way, by watching, by guessing, by seeing how people react. Over time, you begin to recognize the difference between a flourish meant to show off embroidery and a flick meant to send a message. You take a seat near the corner, opening your own fan, a pale silk, one painted with a scene of a garden that never truly existed, and give it 2 light taps against your knee. Across the room, a woman in a green gown tilts her head slightly and returns the gesture with 1 tap, slower, as if confirming receipt. It is not about what is said aloud here. The fans do the speaking. The words spoken are simply decoration. The letter above your temple seems to listen along with you. You can almost imagine it leaning forward, waiting for its moment. This is not the place for a hand-to-hand exchange, too many eyes, too many mirrors, but this is the place where arrangements are made. A man with silvered hair drifts into the conversation near your corner. He speaks about the weather, but his fan moves in a different language, half open, then closed again in a slow rhythm that draws your attention. You shift your own fan to cover your lips for a moment. An acknowledgement, a fact you've heard whispered in corridors. The language of the fan may not have been as rigidly codified as some like to claim, but in certain circles, Gestures carried enough shared understanding to work as an informal code. Whether or not there was ever an official dictionary, the important thing was that the players knew the rules, or at least the rules for that particular room, that particular evening. And here, in this room, you know the rules. The woman in the green gown rises, crossing to a small side table where a bowl of sugared almonds sits. She chooses one, lets it rest in her palm for a heartbeat, and then slips it into the pocket hidden in her skirts. To anyone else, it's nothing. To you, it's a confirmation. The letter will be delivered later, under the guise of another sweet exchange. You close your fan slowly, the ribs clicking together like the soft closing of a book. The conversation around you drifts to a new topic, a recent play, its actors, the scandal of a scene that some thought too daring. You smile at the right moments, offer a brief comment when prompted, but your attention remains on the rhythm of fans and fingers, on the way each gesture either widens the circle of trust or closes it tighter. When you finally rise to leave, you make a point of brushing your fingers lightly along the edge of your fichu, adjusting it as though it had shifted. It hasn't, but the movement allows you to check, without obvious intent, that the coiffure above is still perfect. The letter still held exactly where it should be. Outside, the cooler air greets you with a faint kiss against your cheek. The fans remain behind, still fluttering, still speaking their silent language. Some will leave the salon tonight remembering the witty remarks, the taste of sugared almonds, the warmth of the fire. You will leave remembering the quiet conversations that happened without a single word being spoken. And the letter, still waiting, will leave with you. The staircase is narrow and uneven, the kind of climb that makes you aware of your balance. Each step rises just a little higher than the last, and the wood creaks underfoot with the familiar fatigue of old boards. Above, a thin ribbon of light spills down from a half-open attic door, and with it comes the faint, unmistakable scent of rice powder. You duck your head slightly as you enter, not for modesty, but to protect the careful architecture above your temple. The attic is low-ceilinged, its rafters draped with lengths of ribbon and lace, like laundry lines for finer things. Against the far wall, a dressing table is crowded with jars, brushes, combs, and the swans, down puffs that give the air its pale haze. The milliner herself is there, seated on a low stool. Her fingers are busy with a strip of pink satin, folding and twisting it into a rosette without ever glancing down. She looks up just long enough to nod a greeting. "Close the door," she says softly. The door clicks shut behind you, sealing the room in its gentle cloud of powder. Tiny particles catch in the light from the small window, turning each beam into a stream of pale gold. You breathe in, and the scent settles in your nose, sweet, dry, and faintly floral from whatever sachets she's hidden among the supplies. You sit at the dressing table without needing to be asked. Here, the ritual is understood. The milliner sets aside the ribbon and takes up a puff, tapping it twice against the jar before patting it over the crown of your hair. She works slowly, her motions practiced, each pat releasing another burst of powder into the air. The letter does not move. Nestled in its coil, it might as well be part of you. But the milliner still works with care, circling the area as though tending to a fragile ornament. You know she has done this before, not just for you, but for others whose errands required more than a bonnet for cover. There's a faint rustle behind you. A young apprentice emerges from the shadows at the back of the room, carrying a hat box almost as tall as her torso. She sets it down beside the table, her eyes flicking toward you and then away again. The box opens with a sigh of fabric, revealing a new creation, a pale gray turban with a jeweled clasp. It is beautiful, and more importantly, practical. The milliner places it lightly atop your coiffure, adjusting the drape so that it neither crushes the curls nor exposes their secret. The jewel catches the attic light, drawing attention exactly where you want it, away from the smooth loops near your temple. A fact surfaces in your mind. By the middle of this century, powdered hair has become as much a part of urban life as street lamps or carriage wheels. Satirical prints may mock it, but the truth is simpler powder softens, it conceals, it blurs edges. In a room like this, it also creates privacy. Conversations here are muffled not by walls but by the hiss of powder puff on hair, the thickened air swallowing sound. The milliner leans closer, pretending to smooth a curl and murmurs, You'll go out the side door today. You nod, keeping your eyes on your reflection. The apprentice returns with a small glass vial, setting it discreetly beside the powder jar. The milliner doesn't explain, and you don't ask. Not every object in this room is meant to be worn. When she is satisfied with her work, the milliner steps back. The turban sits perfectly, its folds arranged to suggest casual elegance rather than careful intention. The powder has settled into your hair, sealing every strand into place. The letter rests as securely as if it had been stitched there. You rise, smoothing your skirts, and hand the milliner a coin folded in paper. She doesn't open it now. She simply tucks it into the pocket of her apron. The side door leads to a quiet alley behind the shop. The air here is cooler, sharper, smelling faintly of damp stone and distant bread ovens. You step into it without hesitation, your shadow stretching long against the wall in the afternoon light. Behind you, the attic door closes. Ahead, the street bends away toward your next destination. In Paris, some secrets are passed in the open. Others travel under powder clouds in attics like this one, carried out the door by women who look as though they've come from nothing more dangerous than a fitting. And you are one of them. You've long known that Paris feeds on two things: spectacle and rumor. Fashion, in this city, is never just about beauty. It's about statement, influence, and occasionally misdirection. The taller the coiffure, the more elaborate the adornment, the more stories it inspires. Some of those stories are harmless exaggerations. Others grow teeth. This morning, as you cross the Pont Neuf, the city hums with both kinds. The bridge is busy, vendors selling pamphlets, couples strolling arm in arm, beggars calling from the shade of stone arches. A man with a tray of wooden combs tries to catch your attention, holding one up as if to measure it against your hair. You decline with a polite smile, but the moment plants an idea in your mind. He's probably heard the rumors too. There's one in particular making the rounds this season, that a certain duchess, admired for her enormous powdered coiffure, managed to pass military intelligence to a foreign envoy by tucking coded notes beneath her curls. Depending on who's telling the story, she was either a patriot risking her life for the crown, or a traitor selling secrets for gold. The details shift, but the image remains. A towering hairpiece hiding something far more dangerous than feathers and lace. You can't help but smile at the way gossip turns ordinary acts into grand intrigue. Powder, ribbon, and pins become tools of espionage. The delicate act of arranging hair becomes a matter of state security. A fact you've read in a small, cheaply printed pamphlet, the kind sold on street corners, alongside scandal sheets, claimed that ladies' hairstyles were so elaborate they could conceal entire birds' nests. You doubt anyone truly smuggled wildlife on their heads, but you also know satire rarely invents from nothing. Somewhere, someone has tucked something unusual into their hair, and someone else has noticed. The rest writes itself. Today, you are the someone with something unusual, though you suspect your letter is far less romantic than the stories prefer. No foreign battle plans, no royal confessions, just a message that needs to travel unseen. Still, the principle is the same. As you reach the far side of the bridge, you hear snatches of conversation. A group of young men laughing over a caricature pasted to a wall, showing a woman with hair so high it topples backward under the weight of miniature ships. One points at you, grinning, and says something you can't quite catch. You don't need to. The laugh is enough to tell you that he's drawing the comparison. You keep walking, neither slowing nor speeding up, letting the laughter fade behind you. Their amusement is a shield. No one mocks what they suspect is real. Your route takes you past the bookstalls along the quay. The smell of old paper and ink rises from the wooden boxes, mingling with the river's damp breath. A vendor waves you over, offering a slim volume bound in pale calfskin. Its title is stamped in gold, Les Secrets des Dames de la Cour. Inside, you know, will be equal parts advice, flattery, and thinly disguised gossip. You turn it over in your hands but set it back down. You don't need to read the printed rumors when you're living one. A memory surfaces from a conversation at last week's gathering. Someone asked, half in jest, whether you ever hid love letters in your hair. You had laughed, saying only, "If I did, would I tell you?" That had been enough to send a ripple of amused whispers around the room. Let them guess. Guessing keeps them occupied, and occupied minds are less likely to look too closely. As the afternoon light shifts, you turn down a narrower street. Here, the buildings lean closer together, their upper floors nearly touching across the gap. Laundry lines crisscross above your head, and the air smells faintly of soap and damp linen. A woman pauses in her doorway to watch you pass, her gaze sweeping over your gown, your ribbons, your powdered hair. You meet her eyes just long enough to acknowledge her, then move on. The city's rumor mill spins faster than any carriage wheel. Today's whispers about hairstyles hiding secrets will be replaced tomorrow by something else, a scandal at court, a duel in the gardens, perhaps another exaggerated account of a duchess and her coded notes. But for now, you are part of the living proof that such things are possible, even if no one can quite decide whether to believe it. And as long as they can't decide, you remain safe. The steps of the Paris Opera are crowded tonight, a slow-moving tide of silk, brocade, and candlelight reflected in polished carriage doors. Lanterns swing gently above the entrance, their glass panes catching the gleam of jewels at necks and wrists. The air smells of damp stone, perfume, and the faint, sweet smoke of tallow candles. Your carriage pulls up, and the driver opens the door with a flourish. You step down carefully, the arc of your skirts fanning out as you place one gloved hand in his. Above, the architecture of your hair holds steady. The letter within is as secure as if it were locked in a drawer. Inside, the opera house is warm, heavy with the mingled scents of powder, scent water, and too many bodies in close quarters. The chandeliers cast their light across a sea of powdered heads, each style competing with the next for height and ingenuity. It is, in truth, a parade ground for fashion and a battlefield for attention. You know who will be here tonight. She never misses a premiere. Your rival, though neither of you would name it so aloud. She is already in her box when you arrive, leaning forward just enough to show off the glitter of her earrings. Her smile is polished as her pearls. Her eyes meet yours for only a moment, but the exchange is sharp enough to cut. Her hair tonight is higher than yours, adorned with a spray of white feathers that tremble when she moves. It is beautiful, and you suspect designed to outshine you. If only she knew what your coiffure contains tonight, she might not be so quick to compete. You take your seat in your own box, the red velvet warm beneath your hands. The bustle below fades slightly as the orchestra begins its tuning strings sighing, oboes murmuring, a flute testing a high note. Across the theater, she glances your way again, her eyes narrowing in the briefest acknowledgement. The opera begins. The first act unfolds in a wash of music and movement, the stage glowing under candlelight. But you are aware, even in the darkened hall, of her gaze flicking toward you now and then, as if to measure your stillness, your composure. A fact you've learned over years in rooms like this. Watching someone is its own form of communication. A held glance can be as pointed as a whispered insult, an averted one as damning as public scorn. Tonight, your stillness is deliberate. You do not fidget. You do not adjust your hair. You let the letter rest, safe and invisible, while your posture tells her nothing except that you are entirely at ease. At the interval, you step into the corridor with the other guests. The air is cooler here, though still thick with perfume and the faint tang of wine. She is there, of course, surrounded by a small circle of admirers. Her laughter carries just far enough to reach you, threaded with something almost but not quite mocking. You let your fan open with a quiet snap and glance at her over its edge. Her own fan answers with a slow sweep downward, the sort of gesture that could mean dismissal or simple disinterest. The ambiguity is the point. A mutual acquaintance appears between you, chattering about the performance. His eyes flit from her to you and back again, as though expecting sparks. But no words pass directly between you. The duel tonight is not fought with voices. It is fought with presence. You return to your box for the second act, letting the music carry you forward. The letter remains undisturbed, the pins holding fast through every knot of your head to the rhythm of the score. Across the way, she leans in to speak to someone, but her eyes keep returning to you, as if trying to read something hidden. When the final curtain falls and the applause swells, you rise with the rest, gloved hands coming together in polite appreciation. Outside, The crowd spills once more onto the opera steps, lanterns bobbing, horses stamping impatiently in the cold air. Your carriage arrives before hers, and you allow yourself one small victory, stepping inside without haste, knowing she will see you leave, knowing she will remember the sight of you, serene and untouched, vanishing into the night with your secret still perfectly in place. In Paris, rivals may compete in jewels and height of hair, but the real triumph lies in what they never discover. The next morning begins quietly, the kind of pale winter light that makes the gilded edges of your mirror seem almost soft. You are halfway through your tea when the familiar rap comes at the door, 3 firm knocks, a pause, and then one lighter tap. Only your hairdresser knocks like that, as if keeping the rhythm of a tune only he knows. He sweeps in without waiting for your answer, the cold air clinging to his coat before the warmth of the room claims it. His lacquered case is under one arm, the scent of bergamot and faint starch already following him. "Sit," he says, with the authority of a surgeon and the familiarity of an old friend. You do as you're told, and the ritual begins. The parting of hair, the careful warming of pomade between his palms, the first smooth stroke from crown to nape. It's only when he leans closer to adjust the second coil, the one that holds the letter, that he murmurs something unexpected. "You're not the first," he says almost idly, as though commenting on the weather. You keep your gaze fixed on the mirror, letting him see nothing but polite interest. "No?" He smiles faintly, the corner of his mouth lifting as his hands continue their work. "Not the first client to ask me for discretion. Not the first to have me place something where no one would think to look. A fact you've always suspected, but never heard aloud. Hairdressers hear everything. They work in silence. They are present in private rooms, and they are trusted with appearances that often need protecting. In Paris, that makes them not just artisans, but archivists of secrets." He begins to tell you stories not in detail, never in a way that names names, but in the safe, vague poetry of a man who knows the value of implication. A note passed to a lover under the pretense of a feather adjustment. A miniature portrait carried to a clandestine meeting, hidden beneath a cascade of powdered curls. Once, he says, even a small key, wrapped in silk, destined for a locked drawer in a room no husband ever entered. His voice is low enough that it blends with the sound of the swans down puff tapping against your hair. Powder rises in a gentle cloud between you, settling on your lashes like snowflakes. He tells these stories not with pride exactly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose craft extends beyond beauty into strategy. You wonder briefly how many times you've sat here, oblivious to the other errands his fingers were serving for someone else. He pauses to slide in a pin, angling it just so to keep the letter flat against your head. "Most people think height is for vanity," he says, "but height is also for space. And space is opportunity." It's as close to an outright confession as you've ever heard from him. The mirror catches your eyes meeting in reflection. There's an understanding there now, unspoken, but solid. He will never ask about the contents of what you carry, and you will never ask about the other clients whose secrets passed briefly through his hands. By the time he's finished, the style is flawless. Loops and ribbons arranged with a casual elegance that belies the precision of their construction. The letter is as secure as if it had been stitched into the fabric of your gown. He steps back, dusts a bit of powder from your shoulder, and says only, "It will hold." And you believe him. In Paris, there are professionals you pay for beauty, and there are professionals you pay for silence. Sometimes, you're lucky enough to find one who offers both. The river always smells different depending on the hour. In the early morning, it carries the chill of stone bridges and the faint metallic tang of barges moving slow beneath them. By afternoon, there is the warmth of sunlit water and the mingled breath of the city's markets drifting across it. Today, as you step onto the quay, the Seine greets you with a breeze that smells faintly of wet rope, crushed herbs from the gardens upriver, and the faint sourness of last night's rain caught in the crevices of the embankment. Your cloak billows just enough to remind you to keep your pace measured. Wind is not an enemy, but it is a negotiator. It will try to bargain with your balance, your skirts, and the architecture of your hair. The letter, tucked in its quiet alcove above your temple, must not feel the change in air at all. The path is lined with the usual collection of river life. Fishermen in wool caps crouched over their lines, bookstall owners leaning on their counters as they arrange their stock, washerwomen beating damp linen against smooth stones. Their chatter rises and falls with the slap of water against the quay wall. A gust comes from the west, curling around you with playful fingers. The powdered loops above your head shiver, but the pins hold, the pomade holds, and the letter remains exactly where it should. You let the wind pass through. You like music acknowledged, but not answered. A fact you've read in some long-forgotten pamphlet surfaces. The Seine has been used as a courier longer than most streets in Paris. Messages once traveled by boat hidden in barrels, tucked into oars, or carried in the pockets of men who looked like they were only fishing. The river doesn't ask questions, and neither do most of the people who work along it. You like to think your walk here is in the same tradition, not hurried, not secretive, simply another current in the day's flow. A man selling roasted chestnuts calls out from under a striped awning. The scent drifts toward you, warm and nutty, briefly overpowering the cooler notes of the breeze. You decline with a shake of your head, but the call serves another purpose. It draws a handful of people toward him, creating a momentary screen between you and the rest of the quay. You use the cover to adjust your cloak, fingers brushing just high enough to confirm that the loops above your temple have not shifted. The texture of the powder is reassuring, soft, fine, unchanged. The bridge ahead casts its shadow over the water, and you pause for a moment beneath its arch. The air here is cooler, and the sound changes. The wind is muted, replaced by the hollow drip of water falling from the stone overhead. You watch the ripples move across the surface, their slow rhythm almost hypnotic. From the opposite bank, a barge pushes away, its oars dipping in unison. A woman on the deck leans over to shake out a blanket, sending droplets into the air that catch the sunlight like glass beads before they vanish into the river. You step back into the light, letting the wind find you again. It brings with it a faint trail of music from somewhere upriver, a violin, perhaps, or simply the wind catching a loose shutter and making it sing. Either way, the sound is gentle, the kind that settles into the background rather than demanding attention. The powder in your hair carries its own faint perfume now, mixed with the scents of the quay. If anyone walked close enough, they might smell orange blossom first, then rice powder, and finally, if they were impossibly attentive, the faintest trace of ink. But here, by the river, those traces are carried away before they can be noticed. The letter remains still. You feel its presence less as an object now, and more as an intention, as if it has become part of your posture, your balance, the way you measure each step. By the time you reach the next bridge, the wind has quieted, the air warmer. The Seine moves on, carrying the city's reflections with it, and you, like the river, keep what you carry to yourself. You don't remember the first dress you loved, or the first song that would not leave your head, but you remember the first letter you ever hid in your hair. It arrives in your memory the way a violin enters a room from a courtyard, faint at first, then unmistakable, as if the day has been waiting for this exact sound to return. You were younger then, young enough to believe that good handwriting could save a person from bad decisions. The morning was bright and rather too honest about it. Your mirror threw back the entire truth of your face, hopeful, powdered a touch too generously, the brows a little too eager. You had a letter, folded small, sealed with a blot of wax that looked like a heart if the light fell kindly. The words were not extraordinary. Lovers rarely write extraordinary sentences. They write ordinary ones with a kind of fervor that makes them glow. I will be there, if you are there. If you cannot be there, I will still be there. The sort of logic that only works if a person is very much in love, or very much determined to be unreasonable. At the time, you were both. You could have carried it in a glove, of course, or tucked it behind your stomacher, or slipped it into the pocket sewn into your skirt. But your hands were clumsy with nerves, and your bodice felt too closely watched, and you had heard just the week before your hairdresser say, almost casually, that powder had a way of quieting whatever lay beneath it. So you lifted a loop, slid the paper in, and thought you had invented an entirely new method of speech. The letter rustled softly against your temple, and your heart answered it as though it were a bird in your hands. The rendezvous was nothing grand, A garden with hedges clipped into obedient geometry. A path that promised privacy if one walked it slowly. A bench that had listened to 100 earlier promises and never told a soul. You remember waiting there and thinking the hedges wore their green the way you wore your gown? A little formally, a little self-conscious. He arrived late enough to be forgiven. He had the look of a man who'd walked quickly but wished to seem otherwise. When you greeted him, you felt the letter stir where it rested above your ear, and for a moment, you imagined it as a little creature determined to leap into his hand without your permission. You laughed too softly to be heard at your own imagination. In fairness, first letters are persuasive animals. You sat and for a time said nothing, and the not saying felt as eloquent as anything the letter contained. When at last you turned your head, as if to admire a bumblebee too interested in a hedge, the paper slipped into your palm as neatly as a coin. No audience, no ceremony. The exchange made itself. He did not open it there, wise man, but the change in his face said that he would open it soon, with a seriousness rarely granted to paper. You remember thinking, so this is how a sentence crosses a city without learning to shout. A fact to anchor the romance, because love is lovelier when it stands on something true. By the mid-1702nd, Paris had an efficient little city post that could deliver notes within a day, sometimes within hours, and yet people still preferred hands, fans, sleeves, and yes, hair. The official post left trails, addresses, dates, clerks with curious eyes. Private delivery left only the memory of a glance and the faintest trace of perfume. Some scholars argue that women's literacy, growing steadily in urban centers, fed a tidal wave of correspondence. Others insist letters mostly bloomed in the same circles where conversation already ruled salons, theaters, gardens like the one you sat in. Both thoughts can live side by side. You've seen laundresses write as neatly as lawyers, and you've heard duchesses mangle verbs so thoroughly you wanted to send them back to school with a slate and a stern governess. That first lover of yours, bless him, wrote extravagantly. He mistook metaphor for urgency and used both with vigor. The moon did a scandalous amount of labor in his sentences. The river was constantly conspiring. Doves, always doves, kept cooing in the margins as if paid by the hour. You forgave it all. The marks of sincerity are not always elegant. Besides, once, in a moment of pride, you wrote that his eyes were dark as a respectable scandal, and he forgave you that too. Quirks collected themselves around courtship like crumbs beneath a good loaf. He preferred brown sealing wax because he thought it looked serious. You preferred red because it looked like a decision. He believed lemon juice could make a message disappear until warmed a trick he'd learned from a cousin who liked mischief more than sense. You tried it once and produced a ghost of a sentence that looked like a shy bruise on paper. You both agreed that romance ought to be visible and went back to ink. There was, even then, talk of watchers. Not police, or not always, but people whose profession was to notice what others believed themselves to be doing privately. Porters, coachmen, chambermaids cleverer than their employers. You learned to leave the ends of things untied, a phrase that could be taken for something harmless, a route that could have been chosen for the weather, a dress that was fashionable enough to be forgettable. If anyone asked, you were going to the milliner, or the fish market, or nowhere in particular, because sometimes nowhere makes the most polite alibi. That first season of letters taught you the choreography of carrying. You learned to walk without jostling the loops, to sit without bending too sharply, to laugh with your head tipped just so. You learned the weight of paper against your temple and the way a pin must angle to create a shelf delicate enough for secrecy and strong enough for the day. The hairdresser, who suspected everything and confirmed nothing, began to plan for you. Here, he would murmur, as if speaking to the hair itself. A stair, a balcony, a little room. He meant pin, loop, hollow. But you heard architecture, and you still do. You learned, too, the mercy of scent. Powder softened edges of lines in the mirror, of words that might otherwise announce themselves. Orange blossom water concealed the faint iron of ink. If he hugged you too tightly, and he did, one afternoon, with a bravery that felt like gratitude, he came away smelling like a grove in spring, and no one asked why. Your maid did raise a single eyebrow at the extravagance. You pretended to consider watering the perfume, she pretended to believe you. One afternoon, the letter you carried was a question. Do you trust me? He did not write with this, or for what. Only that floating sentence, as if trust were a room without furniture, meant to be admired for its emptiness. You answered in kind, in hair, by arriving with your letter not tucked but stitched a narrow ribbon threaded through a coil, so that to remove it would be to undo the style itself. It was not practical, but it was eloquent. He laughed when he realized, then went quiet, then kissed your hand in the serious way that makes a person forgive the moon for being overworked in his letters. Later, you told your hairdresser what you'd done. He said only, "We can do that again," in the same tone he used for powder and pins, as though love were a technical problem cheerfully solved. Debates drifted around you then, the way pollen drifts in a courtyard, harmless unless someone breathes too deeply. Some said the fashion for high hair encouraged vanity, and vanity encouraged deceit. Others argued that women used fashion not to deceive, but to purchase privacy, a kind of movable room built above the brow. The truth, as always, lived in moments. A girl hiding a poem because its impatience embarrassed her. A wife hiding an address because its hope frightened her. A widow hiding nothing at all and liking the way height felt like memory. You kept the debate where it belonged outside your door. Inside, you did your hair and went out and delivered what needed delivering. Not every letter was kind. Lovers write badly when they panic. Too many promises, not enough sense. Once, during a quarrel that wanted to be opera but had only a kitchen to perform in, he sent a note so long you feared he had copied the Book of Hours. It contained, among other oddities, an apology to the moon and an accusation against the weather. You hid it in your hair anyway because sometimes the message is not the sentence but the act of carrying it. Later, you sent him back a piece of paper with 3 words only: "Eat your supper." He arrived the next day looking properly human again. You married the argument you both could manage. Small, seasonal, edible. Another time, he tried to be clever with code, the first letter of each line spelling your name. He neglected to notice that the first letters also spelled something unkind to an old friend of his. You both laughed until you had to fix your powder. The old friend never knew. The code had the good manners to be unreadable to everyone else. You are older now, just enough to find earnestness charming and panic less so. The letter in your hair today is not love, not exactly, but it is kin to love in the way anything urgent and private belongs to the same family. It is a promise of action, an agreement that something will move quietly from one pair of hands to another. Lovers built you for this work. Their practice taught your posture, and you carry the day as if it were simply another rendezvous with a hedge and a bench and a sentence that wants to live. The garden from those early letters still exists, and sometimes you walk past it. The hedges are taller now, less obedient. The bench has been replaced, less patient. You smile at it anyway, the way one smiles at a stranger who looks like an old friend. You can't remember the last words that first lover wrote to you. Memory is tender with beginnings and careless with endings, but you remember the lesson he gave you by accident. That a city is kinder to paper when paper behaves like air. Powder helps, pins help, posture helps. But the most helpful thing of all is slowness. The kind of movement that never rehearses urgency in public. This is why the letter above your temple is so quiet now. It has learned your habits. It has borrowed your calm. It is almost a gesture rather than an object, a tilt of the head, a pause at a window, a hand resting lightly on a cloak. To carry something well is to make it indistinguishable from yourself. At home this evening, when the day loosens like laces at the small of the back, you will take down your hair 1 pin at a time. The first will catch in the powder and whisper as it leaves. The second will sigh. The third will pretend to refuse and then agree. The coil will soften. The loop will unlearn its curve. The letter will slide into your palm the way an answer does when it has waited all day for the question to arrive. You will not hurry to read it. You will sit and let candlelight make a small lake on the dressing table, and you will breathe, and the room will breathe with you. When you finally break the seal, the sound will be very soft, like a moth deciding to trust a window. And whatever the words say, urgent, foolish, beautiful, practical, you will know what to do next, because the city has taught you the route and your hair has taught you the grammar. If it is love again, you will forgive the moon for being overworked. If it is business, you will forgive the city for needing cleverness to achieve simple things. If it is both, you will forgive yourself for smiling in an empty room. Either way, you will sleep with powder still faintly sweet on the pillow, and the day will fold itself as neatly as any letter, and the night will keep what you have learned, that most messages, like most hearts, prefer to travel by the quietest roads. The bell over the milliner's door has the softest voice in Paris. It doesn't ring so much as breathe, a little puff of brass that says, "You're inside now. The street can wait." The air is warmer here, and fragrant in a way that's hard to name, a mix of dyed feathers, starch from stiffened lace, and the faintly metallic scent of pins. The shop is long and narrow, with shelves that climb to the ceiling, crowded with hat boxes and bolts of ribbon. Mirrors stand in awkward places, their glass just slightly warped, so that a plume might appear taller, a brim more dramatic. You step inside and let your eyes adjust. The letter above your temple is still and weightless. Your hair has settled into its shape like a cat curling around itself for a nap. The milliner herself is behind the counter, measuring out a length of velvet ribbon in a deep winter night blue. She greets you with the smile of someone who knows the price of every glance and sells it by the yard. Her hands are quick knotting, smoothing, folding as she finishes with her current customer, a young woman whose bonnet looks as if it's trying to win a race against itself. When it's your turn, she gestures to the cushioned stool near the counter. "You're here for feathers, I think," she says, though you haven't told her. "And perhaps not too tall today." She's right. Height invites questions. Today is a day for distraction, not spectacle. As she moves among the shelves, selecting a spray of soft gray ostrich plumes and a twist of pale green ribbon, you notice the mirrors again. One in particular faces the door just enough that a person inside can see the street without appearing to look. It catches the light in a way that makes the outside world seem quieter, as if already part of a memory. You've heard it said that milliners sometimes serve as discreet observers for certain clients passing along, who came in with whom, or which carriage waited outside too long. You don't ask. You don't need to. In Paris, information often rides in the same coach as fashion. While she pins the feathers in place on a stand, she begins a story about a duchess who wore an entire stuffed hummingbird in her hair for a masquerade. "It shed feathers all evening," she says, shaking her head. By the end of the night, the floor looked like a parrot had exploded. You laugh softly, enough to keep the rhythm of the shops quiet. The plumes she's chosen for you are far more modest, their gray softening to silver at the tips. She works them into a small arrangement that will sit low on the head, exactly where it will draw the eye away from anything more architectural. The letter is safe. Still, the act of choosing and arranging feels like adding another layer of camouflage. The green ribbon draws the gaze downward, toward the cheek, while the feathers arc gently to the side. It is a style meant to be admired from a polite distance. No one would think to peer into its shadows. When she's finished, she turns you toward the mirror. The reflection shows a woman whose hair is perfect but unremarkable. A success in a city where perfection often shouts. You nod your approval. As you pay, she slips a small card into the hat box she's prepared for you. It's blank on one side, the other marked only with a short flourish in ink, perhaps a doodle, perhaps an initial. In another shop, it would mean nothing. Here, it could mean anything. You leave without asking, the bell breathing you back into the street. The cold air touches your face, and you feel the faintest stir of the plumes, but the letter above your temple doesn't shift at all. On the way home, you pass a man reading a notice board. The printed sheets flap slightly in the breeze, their edges curling. A detail from your morning returns to you. In certain districts, milliners once stitched secret messages into hatbands, a fashion that doubled as a courier service. Feathers could be flamboyant, ribbon could be loyal, but a hidden seam was where the truth lived. You adjust your cloak and keep walking. The city, like your hair, is built of layers. The most important ones are the hardest to see. The street outside your door is a palette of winter, pale stone, darker slush gathered at the edges, and the brittle light of a low Paris sun. The carriage waiting for you is black lacquer with a roof that gleams even in this muted day. Its wheels are already damp from the melted snow in the gutters. The driver tips his hat when you emerge. You take the step carefully, not for fear of slipping, though the slush could be treacherous, but for the quiet sake of the architecture above your brow. Inside, the seat's velvet is cold at first touch, and the air smells faintly of leather, and the ghost of cigars smoked by previous passengers. As the horses begin to move, the city shifts outside the window, the clipped rhythm of hooves punctuating the carriage's steady sway. You can feel each turn in the street, a gentle lean this way, then that, the weight of your hair moving with it, but never enough to disturb what it holds. Your companion for the ride sits opposite, a man in a heavy coat of dark wool, his collar turned up so high it nearly meets the brim of his hat. He greets you politely, his voice warm but economical. In winter, words travel slowly. They must be sent with care. He speaks of the weather first, the safest of all couriers. From there, the conversation drifts toward markets, the theater, a new pastry he claims has arrived from Vienna. It is pleasant, even charming, and yet every sentence carries a faint pressure, like a glove that fits just a bit too snug. You both know there is more to be said. The carriage rounds a corner, and for a moment the sunlight flashes through the window, catching the silvered tips of the feathers in your hair. He notices. His gaze lingers a fraction too long, then moves politely away, as though he had been looking only at the window latch. You remember a detail from a book you once read. In colder months, letters hidden in hair were safer than those carried in bodices. The body's heat could cause sealing wax to soften, ink to smudge. Powder, by contrast, kept things dry and cool. A hair arrangement was, in its way, a climate all its own. The driver slows briefly to avoid a wagon piled with firewood. Outside, the smell of pine and smoke rolls in through the seam of the carriage door. You breathe it in, letting it layer itself over the faint orange blossom scent from your powder. If anyone ever asked, the answer would be simple. You smell of winter streets. Your companion leans forward slightly, lowering his voice so it becomes part of the carriage's rhythm rather than interrupting it. There will be a meeting, he says, not far from the Pont Neuf. You may see someone you know. The phrasing is careful. You nod once, an acknowledgement without agreement, the way one might nod at an approaching cart without deciding whether to step aside. A bump in the road makes the carriage sway more sharply, but the pins hold. You can feel them a quiet architecture, each one a little bridge between strands. The letter is a guest at the highest table, untouchable by the commotion below. Your companion changes the subject abruptly to something about a shipment of tea that never arrived. The shift is as deliberate as any turn of the carriage wheels. Now we are here, not there. Now the road goes this way. By the time you near the river, the windows have begun to fog faintly with the warmth of your breath. The driver slows, then brings the carriage to a halt. Your companion nods once more, this time in farewell, and steps down into the street. For a moment, you remain inside, watching him cross toward a row of buildings whose shutters look like they have been closed for years. Then the driver clears his throat, the sound muffled through the wall, and you realize the horses are waiting. As the carriage moves again, you lean back, feeling the letter rest against you like a perfectly balanced thought. The cold outside cannot touch it. The conversation has not dislodged it. It has passed through a half hour of streets and words, entirely intact. The city outside continues its winter choreography, and you ride on one more moving piece in a day that, for all its motion, reveals nothing of its destination. The Pont Neuf greets you with its usual contradiction, the oldest bridge in Paris, and yet the liveliest, as if age has taught it to keep moving. The stone balustrades are pale under the winter light, their edges softened by the breath of the river below. You step down from the carriage at the north end. The driver doesn't ask how long you'll be. His gaze has already slid politely toward the horses' manes. The street noise is distant here, replaced by the layered sounds of the bridge. Boots on stone, the faint clink of a vendor's coins, the low murmur of water threading between the piers. The air is crisp enough to make the tip of your nose sting. It carries a mingled perfume roasted chestnuts from a cart halfway across, damp linen from a washerwoman leaning over the quay below, and the faint mineral scent of the river itself. You walk at an unhurried pace. To rush would be to declare that you have somewhere to be, and on the Pont Neuf, declarations are never private. The letter above your temple rests lightly, perfectly still, as if it too understands the performance of strolling. Halfway along, You pause to admire a display of trinkets laid out on a blanket. Brass buttons, carved bone combs, small purses, embroidered with more ambition than skill. The vendor barely glances at you, too busy haggling with a man over a mother-of-pearl snuff box. And then, from your right, a figure steps into view. She is small, wrapped in a shawl of dark wool, her hands clasped before her as though she were only trying to keep them warm. Her eyes meet yours briefly, politely, as strangers do, and then slide away. She stops beside you, looking down at the combs as if she, too, is considering a purchase. In a voice pitched low enough to be mistaken for a breath, she says, "It's colder by the water," the agreed phrase. You answer without looking at her. But the bridges hold the sun longer. A beat of silence. She shifts, as though adjusting her shawl, and in that movement her hand brushes lightly against yours, not enough to draw attention, but enough to confirm presence. You turn your head just enough to let the pale green ribbon in your hair catch the light. Her eyes flick upward, taking in the arrangement, the feathers, the precise coil where the letter sleeps. Then she straightens. "I prefer the brass," she says, nodding toward the vendor's wares. "It is not the signal to act. It is the signal to wait." The vendor finally turns his attention to you, holding up a comb carved with roses so deep they seem to drink the light. You shake your head with a smile, stepping back just enough to let the shawled woman move closer. Her hands are quick, but her expression is idle, as if she is still deciding whether to buy. In that moment, a breeze moves across the bridge. To any passerby, it looks like nothing more than hair stirred by the wind, but you feel the subtle lift of a loop, the whisper of paper shifting, and the tiniest pull as the letter slides from its alcove into her waiting palm. She tucks it beneath the edge of her shawl and murmurs something about the price being too high. You agree to the comb, to the weather, to nothing in particular, and step away. By the time you reach the next pier, she has vanished into the flow of people. The space above your temple feels lighter now, the pins just holding hair and nothing more. Yet the posture of carrying remains. Your head still tilts with the practiced care of someone guarding a secret. You stop near the center of the bridge, resting your hands on the cold stone of the balustrade. Below, the Seine moves on, indifferent to what has just passed above it. A pair of swans glide near the bank, their movements so smooth they might be part of the river's own current. Somewhere behind you, a street musician begins to play a melody that drifts just enough to be carried away by the wind. You listen for a moment, then turn toward the south end of the bridge. The exchange is done, but the day is not yet over. The city continues, and so do you, lighter by a letter but heavier with its absence. By the time you reach the salon, the winter dusk has settled into the streets like fine ash. Lanterns burn low in their glass cages, halos of gold trembling against the wind. You step inside and are immediately met by warmth, not just the air, but the density of voices, silk skirts brushing past, and the faint sweetness of candied citrus wafting from a tray in the corner. The room is a long rectangle, ceiling high enough to echo. Candles bloom in every sconce and candelabrum, their light-softening faces and gilding hair into something finer than nature intended. You feel the weight of gazes, the habitual inspection that greets anyone who enters late. It is not suspicion, only curiosity, but curiosity is its own form of inventory. Your hair still holds its architecture, the pale green ribbon and silver-tipped feathers exactly as the milliner set them. The letter's absence is imperceptible. A style's success is in how it conceals change. You move through the room at an unhurried pace, stopping here to greet a friend, there to admire the embroidery on a gown. The hostess greets you with a kiss on each cheek, her perfume a swirl of violet and musk. "You must join the conversation near the hearth," she insists, guiding you toward a cluster of chairs where the talk seems equal parts philosophy and pastry. The hearth is an ornate affair, marble veined like a map of a forgotten coastline, fire crackling just enough to make the light restless. Around it sit 6 people, a poet who hasn't published in years, a banker with the air of a man who would rather be anywhere else, 2 sisters in gowns that match but for the color, and a pair of students from the Sorbonne whose expressions suggest they are here to study people, not books. You take a seat near the edge, the better to observe without being pulled too deeply into debate. The poet is holding forth on the nature of secrecy, though his examples are drawn from plays rather than reality. In Molière, he declares, a secret always comes out because someone wants it to. One of the sisters laughs. And in life? In life, he says with a glance toward you, it stays hidden if no one knows it's there. You incline your head, as if acknowledging the truth of this, while thinking of the letter that no longer sits above your temple. A footman arrives, with a tray of small glasses filled with pale wine. You take one, the glass cool against your fingers. Its sweetness blooms on the tongue, chased by a faint bitterness like the afterthought of a conversation that could have gone another way. The banker begins speaking of the king's latest tax proposals, and the students lean forward, eager for detail. The sisters exchange a look that says they will endure this for as long as politeness requires. You sip your wine, letting the words wash over you like water over stone. From the far end of the room, a burst of laughter rises too loud for the setting, quickly hushed. Someone has told a joke not meant for all ears. The hostess glides over to investigate, her silk skirts whispering across the carpet. You remain by the hearth, the warmth making your cheeks glow faintly. It occurs to you that, in this room, no one would suspect you of having crossed a bridge in the cold just an hour ago to pass a folded slip of paper to a stranger. Here, the only secrets are which poet you pretend to understand and which pastries you take a second time. A scholar you vaguely know approaches, offering a plate of candied orange peel. For luck, he says with a smile, though in truth, it is for appetite. You accept a piece, the sugar crunching softly before the bitterness of the rind asserts itself. Both are useful, you reply, and his laugh is genuine, if brief. The evening drifts on. Candles shorten. Conversations change partners. You let yourself be drawn into a discussion about whether coffee sharpens the mind or merely excites the nerves. Someone produces a small silver pot, and soon the air fills with its dark, roasted scent. You take only a sip. You have no desire to be too awake tonight. When at last you stand to leave, the hostess catches your hand. You must come again soon, she says. There are so few people worth hearing and fewer still worth watching. You smile the same smile you gave the woman on the Pont Neuf and step out into the night. The air outside is colder now, and the streets are quieter. As you pull your cloak tighter, you feel the gentle give of your hair without its hidden cargo. It's lighter, yes, but also emptier, as though part of the evening's architecture has been quietly dismantled. You walk on, the city folding itself around you, each street lamp another pin holding the night in place. Morning arrives pale and reluctant, the kind of winter light that makes every object look like it has been dusted with flour. Your mirror reflects a version of yourself, half-formed hair still bound from the night before. A faint crease along your cheek from the pillow's seam. The letter is long gone, of course, but your hair still carries the memory of holding it, the pin set as if in expectation. The familiar knock comes just as you finish your tea. 3 firm raps, a pause, and the lighter tap that marks your hairdresser's signature. He sweeps in, as always, like a brisk wind trailing bergamot and starch. Sit, he commands in that voice that turns a request into an inevitable act. His lacquered case lands on the table with a click, and he begins the quiet inventory of tools, comb, pomade, swans, down puff, ribbon. This morning, his hands move quickly, loosening yesterday's architecture. Each pin is drawn out like a confession, each coil unwound with the precision of a man undoing a puzzle he knows by heart. You feel the weight of powder falling from your hair, tiny clouds that drift down and vanish into the carpet. Busy last night? He asks, but the question is as casual as asking about the weather. You answer in kind. The salon was lively. He hums, as if this confirms a theory of his own. As he begins to comb through, he launches into what he calls the news, which is really a braid of gossip, rumor, and the occasional verifiable fact. Madame Fournier's niece, he says, has decided to run off with a painter. Not a successful one, mind you, just a painter. A certain marquis has returned from London with a new wardrobe, and apparently a new accent. And most interesting of all, a woman in a green shawl was seen crossing the Pont Neuf yesterday afternoon, in rather a hurry. And he glances at you in the mirror as he says it, but only for a fraction of a second. You keep your expression as still as the water under ice. How terribly cold it must have been, you remark, as if the shawl's color were the only unusual detail. Cold, he agrees, moving on to a story about a confectioner who's begun flavoring sugar with rosewater from Damascus. His hands are steady, and so are yours. A fact slips into your mind, unbidden. In Paris, hairdressers are second only to postmen in their knowledge of the city's movements. One carries letters through the streets, the other through parlors and drawing rooms, without ever touching paper. Your hairdresser hums as he works, a low tune that might be from an old play or simply something of his own invention. The comb glides, the powder settles, the day takes shape. By the time he begins constructing today's style something lower, more practical, with a ribbon of deep claret, the subject has shifted entirely. Now he speaks of the opera, and of how the leading soprano's wig had nearly fallen off mid-aria. You laugh, softly, letting the sound blend into the morning. When he's finished, he steps back and surveys his work. Perfect, he says, though you know that, in his vocabulary, the word means secure. You pay him in the usual way, coins counted into his gloved palm, a nod, no lingering. He leaves as briskly as he arrived, the door clicking shut behind him. The room feels quieter without his voice, but the silence has a different weight today. Somewhere in the city, a woman in a green shawl is reading what you carried. Somewhere else, the man across from you in the carriage is deciding what to do next. For now, you sit at your mirror, your hair immaculate, and wait for the day to bring its next errand. The market smells like 100 different kitchens colliding at once. Even in the brittle cold of morning, the air is thick with steam from copper pots, smoke from small braziers, and the sharp perfume of crushed herbs. You move through it slowly, not because the crowd demands it, but because markets reward those who linger. The cobblestones underfoot are slick with a sheen of melted frost, reflecting patches of pale sky between the legs of tables and the hems of skirts. Here, a fishmonger calls out the day's catch. There, a woman in a red scarf fans herself with a folded ledger, though the air is near freezing. Your hair today is unremarkable, the claret ribbon low and neat, nothing to suggest it has ever hidden anything more dangerous than a stubborn curl. Yet the habit remains. You walk with the same measured pace, scanning faces and stalls without appearing to. You stop at the spice merchant's table, where neat pyramids of saffron threads glow against dark cloth, and mounds of cinnamon bark look like rolled scrolls. He greets you with a nod, then begins describing a shipment from the Levant, delayed by storms. His voice is low and steady, meant for buyers rather than passers-by. As you run your fingers through a bowl of star anise, a scrap of conversation drifts toward you from 2 stalls away. The speakers are shielded by a stack of burlap sacks, but their words reach you as clearly as if they were leaning over your shoulder. Delivered to the one with the green shawl. Not on the bridge. Too many eyes. You do not turn. Instead, you lift the anise to your nose, inhaling its licorice sweet sharpness. The merchant smiles approvingly, mistaking your stillness for appreciation of his goods. The voices drop lower, replaced by the sound of cloth being folded. You buy a small paper packet of cinnamon, an excuse to remain a moment longer, then drift toward the row of bread stalls. The baker is a man with arms like kneaded dough and a laugh that carries over the noise of the street. He offers you a sugared bun from a tray, and you accept, the sugar already melting faintly against your gloves. While you eat, you notice a familiar figure at the far end of the row, the banker from the salon, his coat collar turned up, speaking intently to a man in a plain brown hat. They stand close, the way people do when speaking of something that shouldn't travel far. The banker's hand makes a small, deliberate motion, a tap to his own temple, as if miming a headache. Or perhaps, you think, as if indicating where something might be hidden. A gust of wind rattles the canvas awning overhead, carrying the scent of yeast and smoke toward the square. You use the movement as cover to step into the crowd, letting it fold you away from the line of sight. A memory surfaces unbidden. Your hairdresser's voice, musing that height in a hairstyle was not only for vanity, but for space. And space, he'd said, was opportunity. You wonder now, how many other heads in this market have carried more than pins? By the time you circle back toward the spice stall, the voices have vanished into the churn of the market. Only the green shawl remains in your mind, not as something you saw, but as a phrase that moves like a current beneath the day's surface. You leave with a small basket, cinnamon, a loaf of bread, a twist of candied ginger. Nothing in it would interest anyone. Nothing, at least, that could be seen. The walk home is quiet. The streets between market and your door are narrower, shaded by buildings whose upper floors lean toward each other like old friends sharing confidences. Somewhere above, a window opens just long enough to let out the scent of frying onions before closing again. When you reach your own door, you pause with the key in your hand. It occurs to you that markets, like salons and bridges, are places where people pretend to be occupied buying, selling, strolling, when what they are truly doing is trading something else entirely. Inside, the claret ribbon is still neat, your hair still untouched. But the day has left its weight anyway, invisible as a folded note. The cafe sits at the corner of a street that always smells faintly of roasting chestnuts. Even when the chestnut sellers have packed up for the season, its windows are fogged in irregular shapes, as if the glass itself is breathing. You choose it today not for the coffee, though it is good, but for the mirror. The mirror hangs behind the counter, tilted slightly forward at the top, so that it catches the entire room in a warped reflection. It has been this way for years, the angle never corrected, as though the owner knows it gives the place a certain advantage. You take a table near the wall, far enough from the door to avoid drafts, but close enough to watch arrivals. The chair is polished smooth by decades of coats and skirts. It creaks slightly under your weight, an old friend settling in. A young waiter brings you a demitasse without asking. The crema dark and fragrant, a curl of steam catching the light. You stir it once, listening to the spoon ring softly against the porcelain. In the mirror, a man in a brown hat enters, the same one who had been speaking to the banker at the market. He doesn't look in your direction. His gaze sweeps the room with the casual thoroughness of someone accustomed to counting faces. A couple by the window lean close over a shared newspaper. Behind them, a girl in a blue dress writes in a small notebook, her pen pausing every so often as if waiting for her thoughts to arrive. The mirror holds them all, the hat, the couple, the girl, along with the faint distortion that makes the scene feel like a painting with a secret. The man in the hat orders a coffee, then chooses a seat 3 tables away, his back partly turned. His reflection in the mirror shows a different story. His eyes are on the door. You sip your coffee, letting the bitterness settle on your tongue, and open a folded scrap of music you brought with you. It is not a letter, not anything important, but to anyone glancing, it gives your hands something to do. In the mirror, another figure appears, the woman in the green shawl. Her cheeks are flushed from the cold, but her step is unhurried. She greets the man in the hat with the kind of smile that could mean anything from "how good to see you" to "here we are again." They do not sit together. Instead, she chooses a table by the far wall, close enough for a quiet exchange, if needed, far enough to look like strangers. The crooked mirror catches everything. The slight nod he gives, the way she adjusts her shawl, the lift of her hand to touch her hair as though smoothing it. You know the gesture, it's the same one you used on the Pont Neuf, a cover for the weight of something hidden. The waiter brings you a second coffee without being asked. The clink of the saucer draws the man's eyes to you, just briefly. You respond with the faintest of nods, polite, unremarkable, enough to be forgotten by anyone else in the room. The green shawl rises, pays, and leaves. The man in the hat waits 2 minutes longer, then follows. In the mirror, you watch the door swing shut after him, the street beyond a blur of movement and frost. When your own cup is empty, you leave a coin on the table and step outside. The air smells of river mist and coal smoke, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell marks the hour. The street is empty in both directions, but the crooked mirror has already given you what you needed, proof of who meets whom, and how they choose not to be seen together. As you walk away, you imagine the mirror's reflection lingering behind you, a room, a coffee, a pair of glances folding itself back into the day like a letter slipped into an envelope. The knock comes just after noon, when the winter light has flattened the street into shades of white and gray. You expect your laundress, or perhaps the boy who brings coal. Instead, when you open the door, a man you do not know stands there, his coat dusted with frost. He holds out a folded square of paper, unsealed. From a friend, he says, though his tone makes it clear he's been paid to say only that. You take it without question, because questions are invitations, and you have no intention of hosting. When you close the door, the paper feels lighter than you expect, as if it has already given up most of its meaning. At your writing desk, you unfold it. The hand is unmistakable, the same elegant slant you last saw in the letter carried over the Pont Neuf. Only now the ink is a shade paler, as though it has traveled too far from the inkwell. It contains just a few lines. Delivered in good faith. Contents compromised. Proceed with caution. Beneath the words is a small mark, not a signature, but the faint imprint of a seal pressed without wax. A habit of the writer, perhaps, or a warning in itself. You read it twice, then fold it again, smaller this time, until it disappears into your palm. For a moment, you simply stand there, the quiet of the room pressing in on you. The fire in the grate is low. A log shifts, sending up a thread of smoke that twists before vanishing. The returned letter is both a closed door and an open one. Someone read it who should not have. Someone else wants you to know. Between those two someones, the space is dangerous. On your dressing table, the claret ribbon from yesterday lies coiled like a question mark. You consider your hair in the mirror pinned neatly, nothing hidden. The absence of any cargo feels both safer and more exposed. You slip the folded paper into the lining of your coat. It does not belong in your hair. It belongs where the warmth of your body will remind you that you are still in possession of it. Outside, the street is quiet enough to hear the creak of shutters in the wind. You pass the bakery without stopping, though the scent of bread follows you like a suggestion. At the corner, a lamplighter is trimming wicks even though the day is far from over. He glances at you, his gaze lingering not on your face, but on the set of your shoulders. You turn down a narrower lane, one you rarely use, where the stones are uneven and the buildings lean toward each other in tired intimacy. Here, the cold is sharper, the light thinner. Halfway along, a boy appears from a doorway, hat in hand. Message? He asks, as though it's the most natural question in the world. You shake your head, and he vanishes again into the shadow. By the time you return home, the letter's edges are warm from your hand. You place it under the corner of a book on your desk, not to hide it, but to keep it still. You do not read it again. Not yet. Letters, like mirrors, show different truths depending on the angle. And sometimes, the angle must be chosen with care. The room settles into afternoon silence, the kind that feels like waiting. Outside, the street resumes its small noises, a cartwheel in the distance, a shutter closing, a woman's voice calling a name you don't recognize. You sit by the fire, eyes on the folded paper, and wonder whether its return is a warning to stop or an invitation to begin again. The theater is a bright island in the middle of a cold, indifferent city. Its facade glows with lamplight, the glass of its tall windows fogged with the breath of those waiting in the vestibule. Inside, the air is warm, scented with wax polish, wool, and the faint sweetness of perfume, the kind that lingers on gloves when their owners clasp hands. You arrive with time to spare, a deliberate choice. It allows you to choose your seat carefully, far enough back to observe the stage and the audience in equal measure, but close enough to catch a whispered aside or the flicker of a glance in the lamplight. Your gown tonight is modest, but your hair is dressed with care, not high, not ostentatious, but with a curve at the crown that suggests space. No letter hides there tonight, only the habit of readiness. The chandeliers hang low, their candles mirrored in the gilt trim of the balcony rails. Every seat is filled. Paris comes to the theater for many reasons, and only one of them is the play. As the first act begins, you let the words wash over you without catching every one. The actors speak in a rhythm designed to please the ear as much as the mind, each line rising and falling like a tide. In the shadows of the boxes, fans flutter and faces lean toward each other, more intent on their own plots than the one unfolding on stage. In the third row of the opposite aisle, you notice her, the woman in the green shawl, though tonight it is tucked beneath a velvet cloak. Her seat is angled toward the stage, but her eyes travel the room. When they meet yours, it is only for an instant, but it is enough to confirm recognition. 2 seats to her left, the banker sits with his wife, his posture formal, his gaze politely fixed forward. Yet in the interlude between acts, you see his hand brush the back of his neck, a gesture so small it might be a scratch or a signal. The interlude brings movement. People rise to stretch their legs, to speak in low voices in the aisles, to let themselves be seen. You remain seated, turning the folded program in your hands as though considering the list of players. From the corner of your eye, you catch the green shawl slipping from its cloak, just enough to show color. A man in a plain coat approaches her row, leans down, and says something too quietly to hear. She nods, her lips barely moving, then drops her fan. He retrieves it, and in that brief exchange, something small passes between their hands. The bell calls the audience back to their seats. The chandeliers rise a little, their light dimmed to favor the stage. The actors return, voices strong, costumes vivid, but your attention stays divided. Half on the scene before you, half on the silent play being acted in the shadows. The woman does not leave her seat again, neither does the banker. Yet when the curtain falls and the applause swells, they vanish into the departing crowd before you can see them join or separate. You leave by a side door, into a narrow street lit only by a pair of gas lamps. The cold is immediate, bracing after the heat of the theater. Behind you, the main entrance spills light and laughter onto the boulevard. But here, the quiet is nearly complete. You walk home with the program folded in your glove, the names of the actors neatly printed, the real performance unlisted. At your desk later, you smooth the paper open, tracing the printed letters without reading them. Somewhere between the lines of the evening, something has shifted. The theater story was acted on stage, but the one you came for, the one played out in glances, signals, and dropped fans, will go unreviewed. And perhaps that is how it should be. The hour is late enough that the city has quieted into pockets of sound. A cartwheel rattling over cobblestones somewhere beyond the river, the faint jangle of a night watchman's bell, the shush of wind at the shutters. Inside your rooms, the only light comes from the cluster of candles on your desk, their flames bending slightly in a shared draft. You draw the curtains tighter, not because anyone is likely to be watching, but because privacy is a habit best kept even when you feel safe. On the table before you lies a small arrangement, the returned letter, the theater program, and a sheet of heavy paper on which you've begun to draw. It is not art, but a map of people, not streets. The banker's name sits in one corner, a line connecting him to the woman in the green shawl. From her, another line curves toward the man in the plain brown hat. A dotted line runs from the banker to the salon hostess, though you're not certain yet whether she belongs in this particular geometry or simply orbits nearby. Beside the banker's name, you write a small note. Gesture to neck, theater interlude. Beside the green shawl, fan drop, handoff. Beside the brown hat, market, Pont Neuf. You pause, letting the quill rest. A drop of ink swells at the tip and falls, darkening the space between names. You consider whether the woman in the green shawl is a messenger, like you, or something else entirely, a collector of messages, perhaps, with the banker as her unwitting or willing partner. The returned letter sits between them on the table, silent and flat. It has already traveled more than some people do in their lifetimes, and yet its journey is not over. You wonder if its compromise happened before it left your hands, or after. The distinction matters, though you don't yet know why. You lean back, watching the candlelight ripple across the wax on the desk. The warmth makes the air thick with the faint scent of tallow, overlaying the sharper smell of ink. Outside, a gust of wind rattles the latch, as if testing it. From a small drawer, you take a folded piece of parchment filled with older notes, traces of other deliveries, other faces, times and places sketched in your own code. You scan them for patterns, for repetitions of gesture or location. The Pont Neuf appears more often than you'd like. So does the market. At the edge of the desk sits your powder box, its lid closed. You place your hand on it as though to reassure yourself it is still there. It has not been needed these past few days, but the memory of hiding something inside your hair is still close enough to touch. The green shawl, the banker's glance, the man in the hat, the returned letter. You write their names again, each on its own scrap of paper, and fold them into identical squares. These you place in the powder box, under the puff, as if keeping them there will hold the connection steady until you are ready to act. 1 candle gutters, sending a thin thread of smoke upward. You snuff it before it can spill wax across the desk. The remaining flames lean together, their light pooling over the map of names. You study it until the edges blur and the inked lines seem less like connections and more like threads in a net, one you're inside, whether or not you meant to be. In the quiet, you decide to let tomorrow find you, rather than the other way around. You pinch out the candles one by one until only the faint glow from the street slips around the curtains. The room holds its breath as you step away from the desk, leaving the map, the notes, and the returned letter exactly where they are. The morning begins dry but restless, the clouds overhead swollen and low, like unspoken words waiting to fall. You step out with no intention of staying long, a short walk to clear your thoughts, perhaps to pass by the bookbinder's shop and see if your order has arrived. Rue des Fosses is quiet for once, its usual clatter muted by the heavy air. The cobblestones are the color of pewter, and the smell of damp stone rises even before the first drop falls. It begins with a patter on your sleeve, delicate and almost polite. Then the sky exhales, and the street vanishes behind a curtain of water. You dart beneath the nearest awning, not quite wide enough to keep the rain from licking at your skirts, but better than standing exposed. The awning belongs to a shuttered tobacconist, its painted sign peeling at the edges. You are not alone. At the far end of the awning shelter, 2 men stand close, speaking in low tones. Their coats are beaded with rain, their hats pulled low, but the space is narrow enough that you can catch their words when the downpour softens for a moment. Green Shawl will meet him at the arcade. Not the banker, someone else. Message came back. Not safe. Your fingers curl around the edge of your shawl. You keep your gaze fixed on the street, where water runs in silver rivers toward the drains. The men do not notice you, or if they do, they take you for just another passerby caught by the storm. The taller one shifts, glancing toward the street's mouth as if expecting someone. The shorter man mutters something about the Pont Marie, the syllables almost lost under the rain's drumming. A carriage rattles past, its wheels sending a fan of dirty water across the cobbles. The splash masks their next exchange, but you catch the final phrase, before the theater. It is a time, not a place, and it narrows the window. The rain begins to ease, the drops growing farther apart until they sound like a slow hand tapping on the awning. The men pull their collars up and step into the street without looking back. You watch them go, their shapes blurring in the thinning rain. You remain under the awning a little longer, as if still waiting for the weather to pass. In truth, you are waiting for your thoughts to settle into the right order. The green shawl, the arcade, before the theater, and the returned letter, now heavier with meaning than paper should be. By the time you step back onto the street, the rain has polished the world into a brighter version of itself. The air smells of wet stone and coal smoke, and your shoes leave prints that disappear almost as soon as they're made. You take the long way home, passing by the bookbinders as planned. The shop is open, but your order is not ready. That is fine, the real errand has already been completed, though neither you nor the men under the awning could have named it that. At your desk later, you blot the damp from your shawl and write 3 new words on your growing map, Arcade Theater before. They fit neatly beside the others, another stitch in the net. Outside, the rain begins again, softer now, like the sound of distant applause. You arrive before the sun has fully burned through the morning haze, the arcade still half in shadow. The long glass roof overhead catches what little light there is, filtering it into pale ribbons that stretch across the tiled floor. The air smells faintly of damp stone and warm bread drifting from a nearby cafe. Shops on either side are just beginning to open. A bookseller arranges his window display with slow precision, placing each volume as if it were a piece in a chess game. A milliner's apprentice props open the door and sweeps the threshold, the bristles whispering across the tiles. You choose a bench beneath a column, angled so you can see the entrance without appearing to look for anyone. From here, you are part of the arcade's gentle rhythm, a passerby resting her feet, nothing more. The first familiar face is the man in the plain brown hat. He enters with a deliberate slowness, pausing to examine the bookseller's display, though his eyes barely scan the titles. His coat is buttoned high, his hands deep in his pockets. A few minutes later, she arrives. The green shawl is wrapped loosely around her shoulders, the color muted in the morning light. She carries a small reticule, the drawstring looped twice around her wrist. Her pace is steady, unhurried, the pace of someone with nowhere in particular to be. They pass each other without acknowledgement. You almost miss the exchange, a brush of hands so brief it could be mistaken for a shared stumble. Something small shifts from her palm to his. He does not stop, only adjusts his hat and continues toward the far end of the arcade. She, in turn, pauses to look in the milliner's window, tilting her head as though considering a hat she has no intention of buying. A lamplighter passes through odd at this hour, but the arcade's lamps are gaslit and prone to temperamental moods. He tips his cap to the green shawl, but she does not see him. Her gaze is fixed on the reflection in the shop's glass. You follow it and see the banker entering from the opposite end. His wife is with him, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm. They walk the length of the arcade without pause, speaking quietly. The green shawl watches them pass in the glass, then turns and walks out into the street. The man in the hat is gone. The banker and his wife disappear into the crowd beyond the arcade's archway. You remain on the bench a moment longer, the tiles beneath your feet cool through the soles of your shoes. When you stand, the space between the columns feels different, stretched somehow, as if holding the ghost of what just happened. You walk the length of the arcade yourself, slow enough to let your eyes skim every shadow. Nothing is left behind. At the far end, you pause beneath the arch, the street noise swelling around you. Somewhere, a church bell marks the half hour. You think of the theater tonight, and of the phrase you overheard in the rain. Before the theater, the arcade, you realize, was not the final act, just the rehearsal. Back at your desk, you add a new line to the map, connecting the green shawl to the brown hat with a small notation. Arcade handoff. The net tightens. The letter remains under its corner of the book, as it has for days. But you sense its presence the way you sense a full glass in a dark room. Outside, the morning haze has burned away, leaving a sky the color of clear glass. The evening light in Paris carries a different kind of urgency. Streets glow in the fading sun, and every shadow feels elongated, as if it's stretching towards something just out of reach. You arrive at the theater district long before the gas lamps are lit, the air still holding a trace of warmth from the day. Theater goers haven't yet crowded the pavements. A few carriages stand idle, their drivers leaning against the wheels, exchanging quiet jokes. A vendor sells roasted chestnuts at the corner, the paper cone steaming in his hands. You buy one, not for hunger, but to give yourself a reason to linger, without attracting attention. From the theater's grand entrance, you walk the block twice, noting every doorway, every shadow. You settle across the street at a small cafe whose windows offer an unbroken view of the front steps. The waiter, sensing a customer in no hurry, brings you a pot of coffee without being asked. The first to appear is the man in the plain brown hat. He does not approach the theater directly. Instead, he circles the block, disappearing briefly into an alley before re-emerging, his pace unhurried but purposeful. He stops at a lamppost near the arcade's entrance, checks his watch, and stays there, as if waiting for no one in particular. Minutes later, the green shawl emerges from the direction of the boulevard. Her walk is smooth, unbroken, as though she has rehearsed this approach. She does not look at the man, but slows just enough as she passes him. A folded scrap of paper appears between her fingers, vanishing into his pocket as naturally as a breath. Across the street, the banker arrives with his wife, dressed for the evening in silk and velvet. They pause to greet an acquaintance, laughter masking the quick, searching glance he throws toward the lamppost. The man in the hat tips his brim almost imperceptibly before moving toward the theater's side entrance. The green shawl continues down the boulevard without once glancing back. The banker and his wife enter the main doors with the slow, assured steps of people certain their seats are among the best in the house. You finish your coffee, leave a coin on the table, and cross to the side street, the chestnuts still warm in your hand. There, in the half shadow by the side entrance, the man in the hat disappears inside. You catch the faintest scent of tobacco as the door closes behind him. The evening crowd thickens, Carriages drawing up in a rhythm of wheels and hooves. Gas lamps flicker to life, gilding the theater's facade in honeyed light. You take a position just outside the main entrance, blending in with the last arrivals. Somewhere within, the banker is taking his seat. The green shawl is gone. The man in the hat is already behind the scenes. And you are exactly where you meant to be, in the narrowing space between what has been handed off and what will be revealed. The bell sounds inside, summoning the audience to their seats. You wait until the last possible moment to enter, your eyes catching one last glimpse of the side door before it shuts for the night. You do not yet know what has been passed, but you know the timing, the players, the stage. And tonight, the performance will be yours to watch from both sides of the curtain. The theater's applause still hums in your ears as you make your way home, each footstep carrying you farther from the velvet glow and polished voices. Paris at night has its own script. The hiss of gas lamps, the soft roll of carriage wheels, the distant murmur of late conversations behind shuttered windows. You let yourself in quietly. The fire in your grate has burned low, giving off a steady, gentle heat. On your desk, everything remains as you left it. The folded letter beneath the weight of a book, the powder box, the map of names and lines. You unpin your hair slowly, feeling each pin release with a tiny click against the wood of the desk. The final coil falls free, warm from the day, sliding over your shoulders like the closing of a curtain. The letter stays where it is. Whatever has moved between the banker, the green shawl, and the man in the brown hat will continue in its own time. You have seen enough to understand its shape and enough to leave it alone for tonight. You cross to the chaise and stretch out, your skirts settling in quiet folds. The city beyond your shutters moves on without you. Somewhere, a cart clatters over cobblestones. Somewhere else, a window opens and then closes. Your breathing slows. The edges of the day soften. The warmth of the fire drifts toward you, wrapping around your shoulders like an old friend's arm. The letter can wait. The names can wait. Even the city can wait. Tonight belongs to the simple act of closing your eyes. And when you do, Paris recedes into a murmur, a low, steady lull that carries you into sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.